Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Elizabeth Johnson. Elizabeth Johnson was 23 years old, and her husband was 25. They lived in Tempe, Arizona, USA. Although on the surface they appear to be a happy couple, their reality is much different. Elizabeth's life has been through many hardships, which have negatively impacted her relationships. Her parents were addicted to illegal substances and barely cared for her, forcing her to grow up in poverty. Fortunately, her time in this dreadful environment was short-lived. Her mother passed away when she was still young, drowning after losing consciousness from an overdose of illegal drugs. At that time, her father was also in a state of madness and could not help her. A few years later, her father died from liver disease, which was also linked to his addictions. After these incidents, Elizabeth was sent to an orphanage. Several families adopted her, but then they returned her to the orphanage. These childhood damage caused Elizabeth much suffering. She had behavioral problems and was often labeled a problem child. Now she's faced with adult problems that she doesn't know how to handle. Those who knew her well said she was immature for her age, and she lived in constant fear of abandonment. This fear made her intensely jealous of her boyfriend, Logan. Elizabeth had difficulty controlling her emotions, leading to severe psychological stress. This often resulted in conflicts with her lover, Logan. During these conflicts, she frequently lost control and sometimes physically attacked him. Her immaturity made her unable to understand her own actions. Despite this, Logan loved her, and they got married after dating for a few months. He hopes that marriage will help she change. Unfortunately, her fear grew and her tantrums became very disturbing. For example, during a picnic, they had a fight, and Logan narrowly avoided falling into the fire. He only suffered minor burns. However, when she wasn't aggressive, they seemed like a great couple. Treat each other well and have the ability to become an ideal family. Logan was already suspicious of Elizabeth's change, but he continued to hope for the best. Sometime after the marriage, they discover that Elizabeth is pregnant, which was a big surprise for them. They feel unprepared to become parents. Initially, they had planned to establish themselves before having children, so Elizabeth decided she did not want to become a mother. However, she later changed her mind and chose to continue with the pregnancy. Their son, Gabriel, was born on May 3, 2009. Unfortunately, this did nothing to make Elizabeth more mature. She still behaved like a child. According to those around her, her anger outbursts became unpredictable. During these times, she would latch on to minor issues to provoke conflicts. Gabriel is quite difficult, and she has to try very hard to control him. The boy always wanted to be comforted, and whenever Elizabeth left him alone, he would start crying. His cries irritated her, causing her to lose her temper and yell. It was a chaotic situation, and Logan trying to stay calm for the sake of the child. During that period, Logan worked hard to support his young family, which often kept him away from home. At home, he always tries to help his wife and take care of the children. He wanted to be close to his son, but Elizabeth's temperament made things difficult. Not only was she as volatile as before, but baby constant crying and irritability made her ready to lash out at Logan over minor issues. Her jealousy increased. She becomes more suspicious of Logan's interactions with other women. Her fear of being abandoned turned into panic, haunting her. Everything is getting worse and worse. Elizabeth accused Logan of loving their son, Gabriel, too much. She even grew jealous of the child, convinced that Logan loved her less since his birth. During her angry outbursts, her behavior became more extreme. She started smashing things, including household appliances and dishes. On one occasion, she even took a kitchen knife and cut up the sofa and her son's bed. Logan finds it very difficult living in such an environment. During these episodes, he feared for his life and the safety of the son. He wanted to be close to his child, but he didn't want to continue to endure Elizabeth's anger. Finally, he ran out of patience, especially when Elizabeth didn't change. After a few months of living like this, Logan announced that he wanted a divorce and moved out with his son, Gabriel. Elizabeth's childhood fears and traumas return, but she never takes responsibility for what happened. Instead, she blamed her husband, Logan, calling him narrow-minded. Worst of all, she began to threaten to give Gabriel up for adoption. Logan assured her that he could take care of the baby himself, making such an action unnecessary. Unfortunately, Elizabeth saw this as a new way to manipulate the situation and frequently used this threat against Logan. When Logan consulted a lawyer, he learned that by law, Elizabeth could not arbitrarily let someone else adopt their son, Gabriel. If the child's biological father disagreed, they would need to settle custody arrangements in court. Elizabeth could have given full custody to he, but she didn't want to. She just wanted to control him longer and get revenge. Eventually, they divorced, and they were granted joint custody. However, her erratic behavior made he feel it was unsafe for their son, Gabriel, to stay with her, so he sought full custody. This process took time. Meanwhile, the boy lived with his father, and his mother visited him according to their agreement. Over time, Elizabeth seemed to become less anxious and calmer. What happened at Elizabeth's house when Logan wasn't there was unclear. The situation might have been worsening. As Christmas approached, Logan planned to spend the holiday with his family. He had a grand vacation in mind. They would meet Santa Claus and give Gabriel his first Christmas presents. But this plan was not to be. On December 18, 2009, Logan was supposed to pick up Gabriel from Elizabeth's house around 4 p.m. However, when he arrived, no one opened the door and the car was not in the driveway. This was strange, because they had planned that he would visit and he will take Gabriel away. Then, he continued to knock. By this point, they had a well-established custody arrangement for the child. Everyone was accustomed to it, so Elizabeth's actions seemed unusual. She couldn't just take Gabriel and go wherever she pleased. Logan looked through the bedroom window and saw furniture boxes scattered and emptied on the floor. He thinks she's gone crazy again. She must have packed her things and taken Gabriel away to an unknown location, so he became very worried and immediately contacted the police. Unfortunately, by law, nothing could be done because Elizabeth was Gabriel's biological mother. She was the child's legal guardian. The authorities ignored Logan's worries. Although this made him feel discomfort, he was forced to go home. For the following days, nobody managed to reach Elizabeth. She remained silent. No one understood what had happened, making the situation more complicated. Only Logan and his family were interested in the search. The police ignored his warnings that Elizabeth could be a danger to Gabriel. He had no choice but to do everything to contact she. Unexpectedly, on December 27th, he received a message from an unknown number, but it was clear it was from Elizabeth. She wrote that he would never find his beloved son, Gabriel. She was leaving the country, and when she arrived, she would send him the exact address where he could find Gabriel's body. She also added that, earlier, she had strangled her son, Gabriel. After hearing these words, Logan could barely stand, but he immediately called the unknown number. At first, Elizabeth ignored those calls, but finally answered on the 6th attempt. Logan insisted that she was lying and that Gabriel was fine. However, Elizabeth claimed to have strangled the baby and put it in a trash bag with diapers and then threw it into a dumpster. She said it was revenge for his countless betrayals. After this, Logan contacted the police, but to his surprise, he was again told that they could do nothing. The police did not take what Elizabeth said seriously. The next day, the police got involved because Elizabeth will have to attend the final trial for custody of Gabriel, but she did not appear in court as expected. So they started looking for her. They quickly determined she had gone to San Antonio, Texas. Shortly after moving there, she sought employment and attended a nightclub casting to become a dancer. Other dancers remembered her well and identified her from photographs. She was seen attending the casting alone, without Gabriel. However, after that, she did not appear. From the first time we met, everyone realized that she had a very bad personality. Detectives found that Elizabeth had tried to get jobs at 2 nightclubs at the same time. However, then, her actions became puzzling because she didn't start working at either place. Investigators tried to determine the last time she was with Gabriel before she called Logan to report the murder. From trip records, they learned that on December 27th, she bought a bus ticket traveling between states. Gabriel did not accompany her on this trip from San Antonio to Florida. The investigation brought them to Miami on December 29th, where Elizabeth was arrested at a motel. Investigators questioned her about Gabriel's whereabouts and interrogated her about messages and a call to Logan. She denied the accusations, claiming she only wanted to annoy and get back at he. She mentioned she was heading to San Antonio to meet a couple interested in adoption. This was actually about illegally handing over a child to strangers. She claimed that she spent 3 days with they to ensure they were suitable and capable of caring for Gabriel. On the 3rd day, they met at a park. She gave Gabriel to they and left to begin a new life. She couldn't recall their names or contact details. But after some thought, she mentioned that the woman might be named Cheryl. It all sounds unreasonable, and the most confusing thing is that Elizabeth decided to leave Gabriel with a stranger, while Logan wanted to take care of the boy himself. Why is it necessary to separate the child from the father and find another family to raise the boy? That is illegal. Elizabeth had no answers to these questions. Law enforcement officers searched the San Antonio landfill using specially trained dogs, as there was a chance that the tip given to Logan was true. However, Gabriel's body was not found there. Then, authorities focused their attention on a family suspected of illegally adopting Gabriel. For Logan, this lead was his last hope of finding his son alive. Logan recalled a similar incident 6 months earlier. On that occasion, she went to the airport with Gabriel, seemingly planning to start a new life. Luckily, she didn't make it to the plane and was arrested by the police for trying to kidnap Gabriel. Elizabeth recounted that she cried a lot at the airport. And then, she met a 40-year-old woman named Tammy Smith. Seeing her hugging Gabriel and crying, Tammy decided to comfort her by expressing sympathy. She confided in Tammy that she felt incapable of being a good mother to her baby. Tammy then asked if she was considering giving her baby up for adoption. At first, she insisted that she wouldn't do it. Despite this, she and Tammy became friends after their encounter. They shared many similarities, particularly a difficult past. Tammy had worked as a dancer in a strip club and had been married to 2 men simultaneously at one point. She had a deep fear of being alone, which negatively impacted her life and relationships. She had been married 5 times and had 3 children with different men. All her children lived with their biological fathers, and she had lost parental rights. Unexpectedly, after 2001, changes occurred in Tammy's life. She decides that she really wants to raise her child and get her child back. There was no longer an opportunity to give birth again. So she turned to the services of the black market. During the investigation, it was established that Tammy adopted 2 children and was constantly looking for young mothers with problems so that she could adopt more children. She used social networks to persuade young women to give up their children and even approached pregnant women on the street, asking if they were planning to give up the child. After talking with Tammy, Elizabeth decided to give Gabriel up for adoption. Tammy became Gabriel's mother. When Logan learned of this, he immediately reported it to the police. Gabriel was taken from the Temmie home and returned to live with his father Logan. Temmie claimed that she did not know about the falsification of the adoption documents. Logan attempted to obtain custody to prevent Elizabeth from being able to see Gabriel again. However, the process dragged on for 6 months, which ultimately led to Gabriel's disappearance. After being arrested, Elizabeth launched a public relations campaign to support herself while awaiting trial. She frequently communicated with the media, gave interviews, and blamed Logan for the incident. She argues that if he agrees to let Temmie adopt Gabriel, none of this would have happened. Logan was shocked by her actions, which he perceived as driven by revenge. During the custody trial, he repeatedly sought sole custody, as he was the primary caregiver. Elizabeth wasn't interested in the boy and just wanted to get rid of him. Despite this, the court awarded joint custody. He tried to challenge this decision, but the court did not agree. After several months, Elizabeth faced multiple charges, including forging Logan's signature on adoption documents. However, the court considered this a minor crime, so it only imposed a 30-day prison sentence for signature forgery. During this time, the custody trial concluded. He was given full custody of Gabriel, but he still has no idea where the boy is. Investigators found no evidence of a crime, such as blood stains on the car, and did not find Gabriel's body. So they began to suspect that there might be a black market in child trafficking involved. This theory seemed plausible, since San Antonio is statistically a hub for black markets. Elizabeth had been in the city for some time, so it is likely that she had contact with organizations involved in child trafficking. During this time, she lived in a motel with her child, Gabriel, but later moved out without him. This is a common tactic used by these organizations, which often conduct exchanges in inexpensive motels to avoid drawing attention. Suspicion was heightened by the fact that Elizabeth had no relatives or acquaintances in San Antonio, suggesting her choice of location was deliberate. These factors all corroborate the initial story the detective shared after her arrest, suggesting that Gabriel may have been with strangers. The biggest challenge was keeping track of the child, which was almost impossible, as he was so young. There were several indirect signs. After arriving in San Antonio, Elizabeth posted on social media that if you want to do something, you will find a way to do it. In another post, she mentioned starting a new life. Later, she shared a photo showing 2 diamond rings. Logan knew she couldn't afford such expensive jewelry, valued at over $20,000. Elizabeth claimed they were gifts from admirers, but this seemed unlikely. This new information supports the theory that she sold Gabriel illegally, as payments for such transactions are not typically made in cash. During the investigation, the detectives contacted a young woman who had worked part-time as a nanny for Elizabeth when she first arrived in San Antonio with Gabriel. The girl was hired through an ad and looked after Gabriel for a day. She was shocked by how indifferent Elizabeth was to her son. Elizabeth didn't care if he was tired, needed sleep, or was hungry. The only thing Elizabeth requested was to give the boy medicine regularly to keep him quiet. Elizabeth simply wanted him to remain silent. The type of medication was unknown, but it was likely a sedative. Elizabeth spent 3 years in prison before her trial began. Initially, she was charged with kidnapping, but this charge was dropped. At that time, the law allowed a mother with joint custody to move across the country with her child, so it wasn't illegal. She was later charged with endangering Gabriel's life. The trial lasted 2 days, after which the jury found Elizabeth guilty. She was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. This decision angered many people. Logan was shocked when his 7-month-old son, Gabriel, goes missing, but Elizabeth is given only a light sentence. The prosecutor's office said they had no evidence to prove Elizabeth harmed or killed Gabriel, so no other charges could be brought against Elizabeth. Elizabeth denied the story she told Logan over the phone after Gabriel's disappearance. She continued to deny murdering her son, claiming instead that she gave the child to a couple. She explained that the message and call were meant to anger Logan. And she lied about the boy's body being in the dump. Detectives repeatedly questioned her in prison, trying to get information about Gabriel. Throughout this time, she never cooperated with the investigation, nor did she share anything with Logan or her lawyer. Elizabeth insisted that she knew nothing about Gabriel's condition. She also has no interest in knowing what happened to her son or where he is now. Logan was convinced that the child had been dead for a long time, believing she had indeed disposed of him at the dump, as she mentioned in the message. A recording of a phone conversation between Elizabeth and her old friend Temmie surfaced. Elizabeth was aware that all prison calls were recorded, so she deliberately lied to distract the detectives. During the call, she praised the detectives for their work but then expressed outrage. Then, she confesses that Temmie ruined her life. Temmie got her involved in illegal activities. Temmie's reaction seemed genuine, as she denied all of Elizabeth's accusations. The two women ended up blaming each other for their problems, which ultimately ended their friendship. It remains unclear who was lying during the call. In 2014, Elizabeth was released from prison and placed on probation for 3 years. However, she repeatedly violated the terms. Just a month later, she moved to New Mexico, which was a serious violation since she was required to regularly report to her probation officer. As a result, Elizabeth was arrested and extradited back. She was briefly imprisoned again. Meanwhile, the search for Gabriel continued, without success. Police occasionally receive new leads, but all lead to dead ends, including DNA analysis, reviewing CCTV footage, tracking geolocation, and searching databases. No matter how hard they tried, the boy was never found. After serving her prison sentence, Elizabeth was released. She changed her name several times to start anew and eventually got married, settling in New Mexico. In May 2021, she became pregnant again. This caused controversy. Many criticized Elizabeth, believing she shouldn't become a mother again, fearing she might abandon or harm the child. When speaking to reporters, Elizabeth continued to deny all allegations. In an interview, she claimed that her worst punishment wasn't prison but living without knowing Gabriel's fate. She insisted she had changed and regretted giving her child away, but few believed her. Gabriel's father, Logan, has devoted a great deal of time, effort, and resources to searching for his son. Years later, he had a new family, but he still hoped to find his first child. Although Logan tried his best, but the fate of Gabriel remains a mystery known only to Elizabeth. Logan continues to hope that Elizabeth will eventually reveal the truth so he can find his son. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Borden family. The Borden family's story began in Missouri when Michael and Catherine met as classmates in school. Michael was drawn to Catherine, who was blonde, radiant, and responsive. He used different methods to capture her attention, like helping with homework and inviting her for walks. This led them to become best friends, spending much time together, learning, and sharing secrets. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love. Michael invited Catherine on a date, during which he first expressed his love for her. After some time, they got married in a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where they vowed to love each other through all of life's challenges. 10 years into their marriage, they moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a town founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756 and home to descendants of Moravian communities. Life in the town was calm and serene. Many families were part of the Christian Amish community and lived in a way that reflected their beliefs. They embraced simplicity, choosing to forego many modern technologies. The Borden family was very religious, so choosing Liddites was intentional. This suburb seemed ideal for raising children, as life there was consistently peaceful. Each day was similar to the previous one, offering the tranquil environment the family of Borden desired for family life and spiritual connection with God. Michael was involved in the local church, where he taught Sunday school, while Catherine mainly took care of the home and helped her husband with his community work. Michael primarily worked for spiritual fulfillment, but to support his everyday needs, he worked as a manager at a printing company. Over the years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families in Liddites were large, with many having more than 5 children. To protect their children from the challenges and dangers of the wider world, families often attended church, WH. Our local teenagers participated in youth groups and they were homeschooled. Interaction between families was mainly through joint religious organizations and celebrations. The family ideal established by Michael Borden continued for many years, raising children with faith and discipline. At the beginning of the 2000s, the oldest sons left for university in another city, leaving 3 children at home. These children continued their homeschooling, much to their parents' satisfaction. Neighbors and the couple's few friends praised the children's upbringing and their wide range of interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were known for being exemplary, kind, and responsive, although this wasn't always the case. However, when Kara, the eldest daughter, hit her teenage years, she totally shook up the family traditions. Against her father's wishes, she started playing for the local soccer team, sneaking out to nightclubs, and doing everything she used to be forbidden from doing. Her behavior affected her father. Long talks and guidance just couldn't get through to Kara. Arguments became frequent and often led to her running away. She openly showed interest in boys and sought out relationships. In 2005, David Ludwig, who was 18, and Kara Borden, who was 14, met in a support group for students with homeschooling issues. They were both quickly formed a close friendship, unbeknownst to their parents. They decided to create social media profiles to communicate secretly. Their exchanges were frequent and emotional, and they used encoded messages to keep their conversations hidden for as long as possible. After some time, exchanging letters was no longer sufficient, so they started meeting in secret. Initially, they took walks in quiet, secluded areas around the city. Gradually, their friendship turned into a romantic relationship. They began sneaking out at night to go to discos and stayed together until morning. David, being older, had already experienced first love and break. Kara, on the other hand, was so young that her emotions were overwhelming. Kara was very young, so her emotions were intense. She didn't simply walk, she appeared to glide, with a joyful smile constantly on her lovely face. Meeting David made Kara become obedient to her parents again. Her father was thrilled, thinking the teenage troubles were a thing of the past. But Michael was wrong. It was only the fear of being found out by her parents that calmed the girl's rebellious spirit while she hid her love for David. This saddened Kara a lot, as she knew how her parents would react to relationships at such a young age. Since childhood, they had instilled very different ideas about the possible love between a man and a woman, trying to protect her from that reality for as long as possible. Fearing her parents' negative reaction, they guarded their secret very carefully, but sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, Kara couldn't hold back any longer and shared her secret with her sister. She showed her a photo of David and explained how their relationship started, expressing how deeply in love they were and their determination to be together against all odds. They were even ready to elope. Worried for Kara's safety, her sister told their mother about the elopement plans, revealing the secret of them. Early one morning, Kara quietly climbed through the window into the house and tiptoed to her room, feeling thrilled. She had just returned from a date with David. However, when she entered her room, she froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed, and the situation became pressured without a word being spoken. After breakfast, Kara's parents told her she was not allowed to have any relationship with the young man. Her parents were upset because they had tried to protect their children from violence, drugs, and other negative influences, and they couldn't believe this had happened. Kara's father was so angry and disappointed that he wouldn't let her leave her room that night. However, Kara spent the night at David's house instead. At 5:30 a.m., David dropped her off near her home. They had agreed that Kara would text him as soon as she safely returned to her room. But the message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara told him she had been caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived on time for the meeting. The conversation started with Kara's father expressing strong anger and forbidding David from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents held very conservative values and were firmly against her having relationships at such a young age. The father's heart was unmoved by David's words of love. He warned David that if he saw him with Kara again, he would report him to the police for being involved with a minor. Despite the long and emotional discussion, it ended without resolution. Kara was locked in her room once more, and David left empty. Indeed. He got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or perhaps because he felt he wasn't taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled with being apart and couldn't handle it, so they decided to deceive everyone. They pretended to break up to meet Kara's father's demands but continued their secret love affair. In public or at church, they acted like ex-lovers and didn't even acknowledge each other. Kara's parents felt reassured, believing they had safeguarded their daughter from a rash decision. David missed Kara deeply. In the evenings, he read Shakespeare, dreaming of serenading her openly like Romeo. However, like in the Capulet and Montague story, the lovers couldn't reconcile their families to win their approval. David Ludwig took determined steps regarding his relationship with Kara. He called her home to arrange a meeting with her father, intending to discuss their plans to marry. On November 13, 2015, David arrived at the Borden residence to speak with Michael, Kara's father. He expressed his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their intention to get married. Michael dismissed the idea, saying it would never happen. Expecting such a reaction, David, driven by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was heading to the front door. David then went to find Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting in a chair. David searched the house for Kara, calling her name, but he couldn't find her. Later, as he was driving away, he saw Kara running towards him down the road. She got into the car and told David she wanted to leave, get married, and start a new life far away. They fled the city in David's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with someone who had just been so brutal? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were seen as good kids. How did they become criminals? Kara Borden went missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. After examining surveillance footage, the police tracked the teenagers. The footage showed that Kara went with David willingly, so the charges of abducting her were dropped against David. Alerts were sent across the east as police in Pennsylvania and Indiana investigated reports of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. However, when the police arrived, the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrol officers spotted the car on I-70 in Belleville around noon. David Ludwig entered the interstate and led them on a 5-mile chase, reaching speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. State Trooper Alex, who participated in the pursuit, described David as extremely reckless and dangerous, causing multiple accidents like scenes from an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a major national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had killed his girlfriend's parents and fled with her. It was revealed that David and Kara planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney announced that the earlier Kara abduction charge against David would be dismissed, but the charges for the deaths of Michael and Catherine would continue. After the incident, David and Kara fled together and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being captured in Indiana. Kara did not face any charges. David was held without bail on charges of murder and abduction. Kara was placed under the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase that ended when his vehicle crashed into a tree. He was charged with the deaths of the Michael and Catherine following a prolonged conflict. 14-year-old Kara did not face any charges. On November 16, David was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. David confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that it was a deliberate act and that he intended to shoot them if they got in their way, which he did. During the young man's arrest, the police searched his vehicle and found no weapons. However, when they went to David's home, they discovered 54 firearms belonging to his father, a hunter who had taught David how to use them. In an 18-minute video from a laptop found in the house, David is seen discussing a plan to invade another family's home. The video also shows him bringing weapons into the house. According to court documents, finally he decided not to go through with the plan because there were too many cars at the location. The police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, yet David filed court documents claiming that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. David did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23. The trial of David was brief. According to court documents, Kara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. Caitlin saw David shoot her father and then ran to the bathroom, where she heard a second shot, presumably the one that took her mother's life. David then ran through the house calling for Kara. She told investigators that the couple's 9-year-old son, Daniel, ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. David pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life in prison sentences. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara has been under guardianship represented by legal counsel. In a written statement published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David was dropped, with the court concluding that Kara left with David of her own free will. David's lawyer reportedly stated that Kara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings showed that Kara had ample opportunity to escape. Kara admitted that she ran after David as he left her house. She simply wished to marry her beloved David. Kara has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the District Attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions alongside David's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Kara, amidst her siblings, mourned her pair. NTS. The Borden family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Michael and Catherine are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Borden family and David's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. David's appeal for release was finally denied by the state appeals court, as reported by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office after his sentencing on June 20. David underwent several evaluations at Camp Hill before being transferred to a state prison in Indiana County, where he began serving his life sentence for the murder of his girlfriend's parents. The tragic case of the Borden family serves as a haunting reminder of how seemingly innocent relationships can spiral into devastating consequences. What began as a story of young love evolved into a dark tale of rebellion, betrayal, and violence, leaving an entire family shattered and 2 lives forever altered. The aftermath of this heartbreaking event highlights the fragility of trust, the dangers of secrecy, and the far-reaching impact of a single, catastrophic decision. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez. Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently performed well academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period on the farm was one of the happiest times of her life. Ada came from a family that was not poor but also not wealthy. As a teenager, she looked for ways to contribute financially to her family. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. However, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada remained determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family enthusiastically supported her decision. They sold some of their belongings and did everything they could to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she started working as a waitress in a restaurant. Later, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. It was through this job that she met the Lazarchik family. The Lazarchik family consisted of Father Michael, generally known as Mike, Mother Renee, their oldest daughter Alyssa, and the twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family background, except that they got married in 2000. Soon after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first child, Alyssa. After Alyssa's birth, they were expecting twins, Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarchik couple wanted to hire a trustworthy babysitter to take care of the twins when Renee went back to work. Alyssa was already attending a daycare where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue being cared for there. They interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. She was young, but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, polite, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so that she could work with her for a few weeks and explain the household routines, the state of affairs, and her expectations. She also wanted to see how Ada would take care of the twins. The family had a specific requirement. They wanted assurances that Ada would stay with them for 18 months, and Ada agreed to this arrangement. Initially, they was agreed that she would spend only daytime hours in the Lazarchik household, but after some time they asked her to move in, and Ada agreed. Everything appeared to progress well. The Lazarchik family was satisfied with her work and grew fond of her, placing complete trust in her. Numerous photographs documented joyful moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, the situation changed dramatically in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarchik family that her relatives were returning to Peru before relocating to Germany. Ada was prepared to accompany them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this came as disappointing news for the couple, as it was not in line with their previous agreement. Eventually, they understood and simply asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that moment on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarchik's house. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house at night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarchik family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates on October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada fulfilled the request and fed the children. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw that they were fine, and after interviewing the candidates, spent more than an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Kyle typically woke up crying at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th. Twins usually sleep heavily and require someone to wake them, but Kyle woke up on his own. Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the kids' room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Renee's care before going to work. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to twins, and went to work. The kids were fine, nothing out of the ordinary, except for Kyle's early waking that day. His older sister, Alyssa, went to daycare as usual, but things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, very agitated, saying that one of the kids, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. According to the information provided, the operator gave instructions on how to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on the child. The person carried out the instructions until the emergency medical responders arrived. After a few minutes, they reached the house and took over the care of Kyle. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very upset, explained that after lunch she had put Kyle down for a nap and returned to get his brother. But when she came back with Ryan, Kyle began vomiting and stopped breathing. While the paramedics were attending to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of the events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of the high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she looked for his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to collect the vomit, and when she came back, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver that Renee had taught her in case any of the children stopped breathing, but it didn't work, and she also tried CPR. The paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital after the initial treatment. When Renee arrived home, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still on the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the trip, Renee called her husband, and they met at the medical center. A couple of minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. The Lazarchik family returned home, leaving Ada in charge of Ryan, and headed to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee began to worry that Ada might be too anxious to properly care for Ryan, so she called a friend to help the babysitter at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for Rena's friend shortly after the friend arrived at the house. The friend asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to Ada's account, Kyle had suddenly collapsed while standing between the playroom and the kitchen. Ada said she dropped the plate she was holding, picked up Kyle, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. Ada mentioned that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. The friend didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, expressing her love for Kyle and assuring that she would never hurt him. The friend tried to calm her, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. In the meantime, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarchik family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle informed that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple contusions on the head, left arm, and shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something needed to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, although survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a sixth-floor window. Renee initially found it hard to believe what had happened. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. However, the doctors clearly explained the severity of Kyle's head injuries and the amount of force required to cause them. Given this information, the possibility of an accident seemed unlikely. Renee promptly contacted another friend to pick up Ryan and remove him from the house. While this was happening in the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to go out to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police cart passed by the house. Seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began to cry uncontrollably and scream, "No, no, no," collapsing on the floor behind a door and repeatedly insisting that she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada. She was the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, the detectives told Ada that her story did not explain Kyle's injuries. Ada suggested that Kyle may have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom, but the officers pointed out that the playroom floor was covered in soft carpets, making this explanation unlikely. When trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle may have hit his head on the doorframe when she was carrying him on her hip. In the officer's insistence, Ada showed how Kyle could have hurt himself and mentioned that Mike and Renee often hit Kyle's head without any problem. The officer checked the place where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head, but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury did not seem serious enough to have caused the extensive damage described by the doctors, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also claimed that she had never shaken or hit any of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. The investigation team arrived at the crime scene to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who was staying at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While cleaning the house, the friend found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By the time Friday, October 14th arrived, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid unimaginable grief, the couple authorized the removal of life support, and Kyle passed away 3 days later on October 17th. The detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. Kyle was sitting on the kitchen countertop, and the child fell, landing headfirst on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head. So she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because, when she arrived home from work, Renee complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family. Consequently, she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Kyle testified that when he received the child, Kyle was already unconscious. The examination revealed multiple hematomas, bruises, on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head, shoulder, and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. These multiple areas of hematomas on Kyle's head indicated that he had suffered 3 separate impacts. The examiner noted that the bruises were relatively recent, with one possibly being 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, which is indicative of severe trauma. Although there were no broken bones, the brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, significantly higher than the normal level of 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, the examiner concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. The examiner suggested that the type of injuries could also result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, such as a kitchen cabinet door. The crucial testimony of a forensic analyst revealed that the distance between the fasteners of the broken cabinet door in the kitchen matched the abrasion marks on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and found 2 DNA traces, one of which had a greater contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The minor trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was time for Mike to testify. He explained that Kyle was doing well the evening of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he made breakfast that morning, opened and closed the kitchen cabinets to get utensils and food, and that all the doors were in perfect condition, including the one that was later found with an unexplained taped repair. The parents said they had breakfast with the kids and played with building blocks, with the twins crawling around in a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easily concluded that the events that led to Kyle's death occurred when there were no other adults in the house. The prosecutor in the case stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle may never be known with certainty, but according to the evidence presented at the trial, she outlined a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch and, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, may have gotten out of his high chair without realizing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage could have provoked the violent attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, leaving marks on the child. After all the testimony and closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. When they returned, they decided Ada guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. When the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She stated that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and swore to start over with an appeal. After the jury left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their late son and told about his short 14-month life, from birth to the last picture taken a few days before his death. Family members talked about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was convicted a year later in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, as they claimed that Ada's conviction was based on racism and ineffective public defense. But an appeal required money for legal representation and court costs, which the family did not have. In this case, Ada and her family have been continuously struggling to prove Ada's innocence. They are seeking support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino community in the United States, as well as solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintains her innocence and takes advantage of every opportunity for interviews. Their efforts have paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal team filed an appeal citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial process. After reviewing the case, the appeals court rejected 3 claims but approved 2 claims. This was enough for the judges to overturn the verdict and cancel the trial due to irregularities. After this decision, Ada's family began fundraising efforts again to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The defense maintained that Kyle fell from the kitchen counter on October 12 and sustained a head injury, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, while running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the door frame. This time, the defense team presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises may have been caused at the hospital during the insertion of a catheter to assess brain swelling. The prosecutor vehemently challenged this testimony. Another witness, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense, although he did not entirely rule out the possibility that Kyle's head could have hit the cabinet door. After the trial session was over, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recording again. Ultimately, they upheld the verdict. They once again found Ada guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her case remains the deeply contentious one, with her family continuing to fight for justice, asserting her innocence amid claims of a flawed judicial process and insufficient defense. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lucy Landry. Lucy Landry was born in 1971 in Ronda, England, to Roger and Andrea Landry. She has a younger sister named Anna. Lucy had a happy childhood. Because she and her sister had similar interests, they were always very close. During primary school, Lucy's outgoing and friendly personality made her a favorite of her teachers and classmates. She was a beautiful girl, and at school she became one of the most popular girls. Lucy and Anna shared a love of ponies, and their father surprised them by enrolling them in the local equestrian club. This taught them discipline and showed off their talents. They later represented the club in many events and competitions. By the time Lucy started secondary school, she had become an excellent equestrian. However, her passion was not limited to the track. She also began studying the flute and piano, spending many hours practicing to master both instruments. Her hard work soon paid off. And within a year she had a comprehensive understanding of classical music, and she was accepted into the youth orchestra and joined the school choir. As often happens in adolescence, a healthy romantic interest entered her life, and Lucy became very close to Gareth Jenkins. However, she kept her feelings a secret. After completing her secondary education in 1989, Lucy decided to pursue a career in music. To this end, she enrolled in a BA degree at the University of Warwick. Her goal was to become a music teacher and dedicate herself to music education. However, things did not go as planned. Although she was passionate about music, she did not like the direction of the degree program. She therefore decided to change her plans and study urban planning. During this time, Lucy met G.R.A. McAllister, and they soon discovered that their outlook on life was very similar. They shared a love for art and common interests. Their relationship progressed and they began to plan for the future. Lucy decided to introduce him to her parents. Roger and Andrea were delighted with the meeting, as they believed he was the ideal partner for their daughter. Her parents were so delighted that they decided to buy Lucy a house in Coventry, a city in northwest London. After moving to a new home, Lucy invited G.R.A. to live with her and they continued to go to school. In 1995, they had their first child, named James. Lucy decided to drop out of college to focus on raising the child. Meanwhile, G.R.A. continued her college studies and took a night shift job at the post office to cover her living expenses. For many months, she had to stay home alone to take care of the child and had to be away from G.R.A. for many hours. She began to feel bored. Then, she found no better solution than exploring chat rooms on the internet to distract herself, looking for ways to meet new people. One night, while Lucy was participating in online conversations in many chat rooms, she met Harold Landry. Harold, a 53-year-old American from Louisiana, was born into a very poor family. And he knew that hard work was the only way to escape poverty. His opportunity came when he realized that in the oil industry, the key was not to own an oil well but to provide essential infrastructure for the owners of such. He founded his own company, specializing in providing infrastructure for oil field owners. Harold amassed a huge fortune by designing and manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States, eventually becoming a billionaire. In his personal life, Harold was married and divorced twice, and his children from previous relationships were not made public. A significant event took place in 1992 when Harold was still single. He met a married woman 20 years his junior. Harold pursued and courted her and she eventually succumbed to his advances. On February 6, 1994, Harold took her out to New Orleans, hiring a babysitter to look after her children. After the evening ended, Harold accompanied his mistress to her home and offered to take the babysitter to her home. Outside the residence, Chris, the betrayed husband, secretly watched his wife's actions. After dropping his mistress off at home, Harold, saying goodbye, left. The girl's husband Chris followed Harold's car, which Harold noticed was tailing him. Acting on instinct, Harold opened the glove compartment and pulled out a gun that he had kept inside. When both cars stopped at a red light, the situation became tense. According to the babysitter, Harold pointed the pistol at Chris and fired. The bullet severed an artery in Chris's neck and damaged a nerve that connected to his vocal cords. Chris collapsed on the sidewalk with a wound to his neck. Fortunately, There was a hospital right in front of them, allowing him to receive immediate first aid, and doctors saved his life. Harold was arrested and charged with attempted murder. His trial took place in 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney told the jury that Chris was the victim of a tragic and terrible incident. As for his client, he said he had acted out of fear and self-defense. The defense's clever strategy led the jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, to find Harold guilty of the lesser charge of aggravated assault. As a result, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After an appeal, Harold was given probation. In exchange, he had to pay a $500 fine and perform community service. Although he wanted to be completely exonerated, he thanked his attorney, Pat, for her hard work. They have since become good friends. Soon after, Harold and Chris agreed to an undisclosed settlement amount. By the time Harold began chatting with Lucy, he was already living in Covington and still wealthy enough to not have to work. He was also honest about his profession and everything about his past life, including his love life and run-ins with the law. Surprisingly, these revelations only made Lucy more attracted to him. As they continued to chat online, Harold painted a picture of a lavish lifestyle that Lucy found hard to resist. His determination and charm eventually paid off when Lucy ended her relationship with GRA. In the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet Lucy, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents as her boyfriend. Although they were surprised by the significant age gap between the two, they respected their daughter's choice and did not express any objection to the relationship. Harold felt grateful and pleased to be sharing his life with Lucy, and he did everything he could to surprise her with lavish gifts and anything else she wanted. By this point, he had fallen in love with her and was thinking about proposing to her. However, he wanted the proposal to be special and was waiting for the perfect time and setting. To achieve his goal, Harold organized a trip to his favorite destination, Mexico, with Lucy, her son, James, and GRA. The location was also convenient because his friend Pat, who used to be his lawyer, had an apartment nearby. Before the trip, Harold bought a diamond ring and excitedly shared his plans with Pat. However, Pat expressed some misgivings about Lucy. During their time in Mexico, Pat noticed that Lucy spent a lot of time with GRA, which he found unusual. He seemed completely oblivious to this and eventually went ahead with the proposal. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003. Soon after, Harold surprised her by buying a multi-million-dollar property in a posh Worcestershire neighborhood. Their marriage was peaceful. They had wonderful neighbors such as Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, who later became lovely friends. Soon after, the newlyweds had their first daughter, whom they named Harriet. Lucy and Harold were both delighted to welcome their little girl, and from then on, he devoted his heart and soul to her. Equally important and affectionate was the relationship he maintained with James, whom he treated as his own son. But over time, their initial happiness began to fade. Harold began to make more demands on Lucy, which made her increasingly annoyed. He expected her to always conform to his preferences and do what he asked, taking on a submissive role. Lucy, however, had different expectations, and this caused tension in their relationship. Eventually, Lucy became outspoken and unafraid to express her thoughts, and in this move, her husband was unwilling to give in. James witnessed the breakdown of his mother and stepfather's relationship. The neighbors were disturbed by the constant arguments that lasted for hours. They also knew that Lucy and Harold had an alcohol problem, which caused their loud arguments and complaints. Whenever the couple had a particularly intense argument, resulting in them not speaking to each other for a while, the neighbors felt a sense of relief and peace. In mid-2009, Lucy used social media to reconnect with Gareth, an old friend from high school whom she had not spoken to in years. Lucy's husband, Harold, would often go to bed while Lucy stayed up to chat online. Harold began to realize that Lucy was using social media to find someone new, just as she had found him before. But instead of confronting her, he decided to give her some space, and he traveled to Mexico and stayed there for a while. Meanwhile, Lucy invites Gareth to live with her. In the fall of 2009, her husband Harold returns to England in the hope of mending their marriage. However, as soon as he moves in, Lucy asks for a divorce. Initially, he is devastated. Then, after a few weeks, Harold begins a relationship. He meets this new woman online. She lives nearby and goes by the name Rachel. As Lucy and Harold pursue their new relationship, their divorce negotiations begin, but new conflicts arise. One major point of disagreement is the house. Lucy wants to keep it to ensure stability for their children, while Harold is determined to sell it. He gives Lucy money to buy a smaller apartment and removes her from his will. When Lucy discovers this, her hatred for him drives her to share everything about Harold's past with their son James, leaving nothing out. Amid the tension, Gareth invited Lucy to come to Wales with him for a few days. After returning home, Lucy no longer tried to hide her phone conversations from her new love. Meanwhile, Lucy and Harold were both drinking heavily, and the arguments escalated, leaving the children exposed to a violent and unbearable atmosphere. On Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold had been drinking all day. When a package arrived for Stephen, Harold mistakenly received it. That evening, around 9 p.m., Stephen returned home from work to find a notification that his package had been delivered to the Landry's home. Seeing the lights on, Stephen went to their house to collect the package. Harold invited him in and offered him a drink. After a brief conversation with Lucy, Stephen realized that Harold was drunk. He took his package, apologized, and left. The couple then argued about buying furniture for their upcoming move. The disagreement was trivial, but it escalated into a fight. During the argument, Harold hit Lucy across the cheek with a kitchen utensil. James, who had learned to deal with their arguments over the years, intervened and saw that his mother was injured. He quickly called the police and made it his priority to get his sister to safety. Lucy and the children fled the house to seek help after the incident. Lucy ran to Stephen's house. However, Harold caught up with her and stabbed her several times with a knife before leaving her under a bush in the garden. Alerted by Lucy's screams, Stephen ran outside and found her after only a few steps. Initially, he thought she had passed out, but he soon realized the severity of her injuries. After receiving an emergency call, the police arrived at the scene. They called an ambulance and searched the surrounding area for the culprit. However, they only found the children hiding terrified in the backyard in the dark. An ambulance then took Lucy to the hospital. Unfortunately, her heart had stopped. Harold went to his new girlfriend Rachel's house, revealing that something terrible had happened, but he did not explain further. He gave her $40,000 in bank money, some cash, his car keys, and some blank checks with his signature on them. He then returned home. Several police patrols searched for him, and he was eventually found walking along the road and arrested. Her parents Roger and Andrea were devastated after hearing the news. In a statement released by the police, her parents asked for respect while they grieved for the loss of their daughter. They declined to speak to the media at this time. Instead, they focused on caring for their grandchildren. A post-mortem examination later confirmed that Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. On February 5, 2010, Harold was brought to trial and charged with murder, based on evidence and witness testimony from James. The trial began in early February 2011, with Judge David Fawson presiding and Harold's attorney Andy Childs defending. During the trial, Harold's defense team argued that he was driven to action by his wife Lucy's intense anger, which left him feeling provoked and left with no other choice. Harold took the stand, tearfully expressing his love for Lucy and remorse for his actions. He then followed his attorney's strategy, claiming that he was guilty of involuntary manslaughter because Lucy had pushed him to the limit. The prosecution presented a highly detailed animation of the many injuries the victim suffered. This presentation shocked those in the courtroom. On February 24, 2011, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding Harold Landry guilty of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy Landry. Harold was 64 years old at the time of the murder. The following day, the judge delivered a scathing statement when sentencing Harold. He described the attack as horrific and unforgivable, dismissing Harold's claims that Lucy may have provoked him. The judge viewed these claims as a desperate attempt by Harold to defend himself. As a result, Harold was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years before he could be considered for parole. This meant that he would have to be over 80 before he was eligible for parole. Lucy's family and friends expressed their gratitude not only for the case being resolved, but also for the judge's comments. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Petit family. The Petit family was viewed as a model family, meeting everyone's expectations with their stable financial situation and outstanding children. They earned admiration from the community. The father, William Petit, grew up in Connecticut and excelled in many sports during high school, especially basketball, where he demonstrated natural leadership. Beyond his athletic talents, he was also the top student in his class, earning a law degree from Dartmouth University. However, William discovered that his true passion was not in law. He wanted to help others, care for the sick, and making the world a better place. After graduating, he chose to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his third year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse in the oncology department and medical center co-director of a pre-graduation internship program. They quickly fell in love, and those around them believed they were a perfect match. They married in 1985, and 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley. Then, they to buy a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After recovering from childbirth, Jennifer resumed her role as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Unfortunately, she later developed multiple sclerosis, an incurable condition that she fought for the rest of her life. During her struggle with the disease, her family was always by her side and supported her. At 10 years old, their old daughter, Haley, started raising money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, successfully gathering big funds over the years. Michaela was also a strong student and intended to take over the fundraising when her old sister went to college. She spent the summer learning to cook and loved making meals for her family. Sadly, this everyday activity would ultimately lead the family to a tragic meeting with their attacker. In July 2007, Michaela was making dinner for her family, but then she realized she needed more ingredients. She and her mother went to the nearest market to shop. At the same time, Joshua, had been released from prison, was also at the market. Joshua had a troubled childhood, and a week after birth, he was given up for adoption. The Komisarjevsky family, known for their artistic achievements in Europe, adopted him. They were a strict and religious family. Despite having a high IQ, Joshua struggled in school, which led his adoptive parents to let him homeschool. During his trial, he revealed that he had been sexually abused by a cousin when he was a child, but his family opted to keep this a secret. This experience shaped his rebellious and rampant behavior. At the age of 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky was accused of abusing his sister, and around this time, he committed his first burglary. In 2002, he was arrested on 18 charges of burglary, leading to a 9-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in 2007 when he was 27 years old. Officials deemed him a danger to society, describing him as a calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. Despite these warnings, the jury found him fit for release. After his release, Joshua lived in a halfway house for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent much of his life in prison, beginning his incarceration at the age of 16 in 1980. Throughout the years, he was often arrested for violent robbery and burglary. He was sentenced in 2004 and granted parole in 2006, which brought him to the same halfway house where he met Joshua. Returning to the night of July 22, 2007, when Michaela was cooking dinner for her family when she realized she needed more ingredients. She asked her mother to take her to the nearest market. Unbeknownst to them, Joshua was watching taking note of everything, the type of car they drove, their appearances, and Michaela's blonde hair. After shopping, Michaela and Jennifer returned home, still unaware that someone was following them. Soon after, Stephen sent a text to Joshua expressing his eagerness to get started and mentioning that he needed a margarita. Stephen followed up by asking if they were still on, to which Joshua affirmed that they were. Meanwhile, Joshua secretly followed Michaela and Jennifer in his car, finding out where they lived before leaving the area. The family enjoyed what appeared to be a calm and normal dinner, unaware that it would be their last together. In the early morning, while everyone else was asleep, William was dozing in the living room. Their peace was suddenly disrupted by strange noises in the house. William suddenly felt groggy, in pain, and unable to think clearly. Two intruders, Joshua and Stephen, had come in through an unlocked door with the intention of robbing the family. They found a baseball bat and began to beat William. He heard one of the attackers say, "If he moves, shoot him." Afterward, William was bound with zip ties. Joshua and Stephen used ties to restrain William and bind him to a pole in the basement. They then went upstairs to find Haley's room, where she was sleeping. Haley and Michaela were tied by their hands and feet to their bedposts, with pillowcases over their heads. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer was also asleep. The intruders quietly entered her room and woke her up. They tied her hands and feet, showing their control over the situation. Joshua and Stephen carefully searched the house, even taking time to smoke cigarettes in the living room. After gathering jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they prepared to leave. However, a petit family nightmare was just beginning. After selling the stolen items at a pawn shop and realizing they hadn't made as much money as they hoped, Joshua and Stephen, driven by greed, decided to return to the house. They discovered a check register containing $40,000 and plotted to steal $155,000. Before going back, they also filled a couple of gasoline cans, as captured by surveillance cameras. Once back at the house, they threatened Jennifer, saying they would kill her entire family if she didn't help them. Fearing for family's safety, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to go with Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua exploited Jennifer's absence, he entering Michaela's room, untying her, and attempting to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, he took her to the bathroom to clean her, ensuring no DNA evidence was left behind. He then ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tied her up again. Evidence of Joshua's assault on Michaela was found during her autopsy, where state medical examiner Dr. Wayne Carver discovered his DNA in her body. At the bank, everything seemed normal, but Stephen did not notice Jennifer's actions while they waited in line. Before reaching the teller, she wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note stated that her name was Jennifer Hawk Petit and that she needed to withdraw $115,000 from her savings account. She mentioned that her family was in danger and requested that the police be called, or they would be killed. Despite Jennifer not having any identification, the teller decided to give her the money. With the cash in hand, Jennifer left the bank to return to the car with Stephen. Meanwhile, the bank employee quickly called the police to report the situation. Meanwhile, at the house, Joshua disclosed to Stephen what he had done to Michaela, implying he could easily do the same to Jennifer. Then, Stephen restrained Jennifer by pushing her to the ground and began to undress her. William, upstairs, could hear his wife being assaulted and shouted for help. He then overheard one of the attackers say, "Don't worry, it will all be over in a couple of minutes." William managed to free himself and crawled to the basement stairs, eventually making it to the backyard. Joshua went to check on William but discovered that he had escaped. In her confession, Stephen mentioned that while Joshua was assaulting Jennifer on the living room floor, he entered and revealed that William had fled. Upon hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death while continuing his assault on her. Soon after, William began shouting for help. His neighbor, unable to recognize him because of his injuries, called 911. Realizing that the police would soon arrive, Joshua and Stephen decided to destroy any evidence. They poured gasoline on Jennifer's lifeless body and around the house, including the daughter's bedrooms. Investigators later found traces of gasoline on the beds of Haley, Michaela, and on the clothes they were wearing. Joshua and Stephen set the house on fire and tried to escape, not knowing that police had already blocked the road a few miles ahead. They crashed into a police vehicle, and within 5 minutes, they were surrounded by officers, pulled from their car, and arrested. They were quickly identified as former convicts. The fire in the house was spreading quickly. An ambulance arrived and took the seriously injured father, William, to the nearest hospital. Soon after, firefighters fought to put out the flames. When they put out the flames succeeded, they were met with a terrible scene. The first body they found was Jennifer, who was completely burnt with remnants of rope around her ankles. On the second floor, they discovered Michaela, who was tied to her bed and had been entirely trapped by the fire. Surprisingly, Haley had managed to escape her bindings and tried to flee but collapsed just a few meters away after inhaling too much smoke. William managed to free himself from his restraints, leave the house, and crawled to a neighbor's yard for help. The neighbor did not recognize him at first because of his severe injuries. Both Joshua and Stephen admitted to the murders. Detectives reported that Stephen smelled of gasoline during her interrogation. Each suspect accused the other of being the leader and planner of the home invasion. Joshua also placed blame on William for the murder. In Joshua's diary, which was later presented as evidence, he referred to William as a coward and claimed that William could have saved his family if he wanted to. Stephen's trial started on September 13, 2010, with a jury composed of 7 women and 5 men. The defense claimed that Joshua was the main leader behind the crime. Conversely, prosecutors argued that both Joshua and Stephen were equally accountable. On October 5, after approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Stephen Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase commenced on October 18, in which the jury was initially torn over whether to recommend life imprisonment or the death penalty. Stephen's defense claimed that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8, the jury recommended a death sentence for Stephen on all 6 capital felony charges. Stephen had earlier tried to negotiate a plea deal for a life sentence, but instead, prosecutors sought the death penalty. On December 2, 2010, Stephen Hayes, the defendant, expressed his remorse for the pain he caused the Petit family. He mentioned that death would be a relief for him and hoped it would provide peace and comfort to those he had harmed. Judge John Blue sentenced him to death 6 times, along with an additional 106 years for other offenses. However, in August 2015, Stephen's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment after Connecticut abolished the death penalty. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began on September 19, 2011. His lawyers proposed a plea deal where he would plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. However, the prosecutors were aiming for the death penalty, arguing that Joshua was a troubled individual who had been influenced by Stephen. On October 13, 2011, Joshua was found guilty, and on December 9, 2011, the jury recommended the death penalty. During sentencing, he expressed his shame and regret over the crime, asserting that he never meant to kill anyone. Judge Blue scheduled Joshua's execution for July 20, 2012, acknowledging his involvement in the crime. However, in August 2015, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and Joshua's sentence was changed from death to life imprisonment, just like Stephen's sentence. The trials and sentencing of Stephen and Joshua marked a significant and troubling time in Connecticut's legal history. The severe nature of their crimes and the emotional toll on everyone involved, including jurors, revealed the difficulties the legal system faces in dealing with such heinous acts. William is the only person in the family to survive this tragic incident. After spending 4 days in the hospital, he was released to attend his family's funeral. Struggling with the guilt of not being able to save the lives of his wife and children, he founded an organization to support children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to aid there. Later, he joined the Republican Party and entered politics, eventually becoming a state representative. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Polly Klaas. Polly Hannah Klaas was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California, USA. Her family included her father Mark, mother Eva, and younger sister Annie. After her parents' divorce when she was very young, Polly and Annie lived with their mother in Petaluma, California. As for Mark, he had a new relationship after the divorce, and Polly got along very well with this woman. Overall, their family was very harmonious, and she spent time with both her mother and father, with no problems between them. Polly was a quiet and innocent child who had a few close friends but was generally very shy. However, she found confidence and joy in theater, participating in various school plays and community musicals where she often took the lead role. Her main aspiration is to become a talented musical theater actress. Aside from theater, Polly loves hosting and attending sleepovers with her friends, a regular activity shared among her close-knit group. On October 1, 1993, Polly asked her mother if she could have 2 friends, Jillian and Kate, over for a sleepover. Her mother agreed, and the 2 friends arrived at Polly's house in the afternoon. They had dinner together, and the evening went smoothly until Polly's mother went to bed around 9:45 p.m. due to a bad headache. She told the girls that she was going to sleep and asked them to wake her up if they needed any help at any time. After taking 2 sleeping pills, she fell into a deep sleep. The calm night was disrupted after 11 p.m. when Eva, Polly's mother, was jolted awake by the screams of Jillian and Kate. The 2 girls frantically told her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly away. Eva made an emergency call to the police and then went to check on her other daughter, Annie, who was in her room, seemingly unaware of the incident. When the police arrived, they started questioning Polly's 2 friends, Jillian and Kate. The girls explained they were in a room, select on a Halloween costume and just having fun. As the night wore on, around 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was time to go to bed, and her friends agreed. She offered to get the inflatable bed she and her mom had set up earlier so the 3 could sleep together. However, when Polly opened the door to her room, a man was standing in front of them, holding a knife and not wearing a mask. Since Halloween approached, 3 girls initially thought man's threatening claims were a prank and burst into laughter. However, the man's facial expression quickly turned to anger, causing them to realize the situation was more serious. He swiftly forcing the girls into a room, where he bound their hands and feet with rope. When questioned about who lived in the house, all three girls, including Jillian and Kate, provided the same answer, Polly. Next, the man removed the pillowcases from the pillows and placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, preventing them from seeing. He instructed the girls to count up to 1,000, assuring them that he would temporarily take Polly away but return her shortly. Unbeknownst to the man, the girls peered through gaps in the pillowcases and noticed his swift departure. Then, they attempted to release themselves from the restraints. After about 30 minutes of struggle, they managed to break free. Upon escaping the room, they immediately sought out Eva to inform her that her daughter Polly had been taken by the man. Jillian and Kate provided the police with a detailed account of the events. They also gave a brief description of the man, who had not worn a mask and covered his face, allowing the girls to get a clear look at him. As a result, the police were able to create a sketch of the suspect to aid in the search. The investigation at Polly's house did not yield much evidence. Several footprints were found, but they all belonged to Polly, her family members, or friends who had visited the house recently. However, some unusual fibers were discovered on the carpet, which did not match the carpet in Polly's house. Further analysis revealed that these fibers likely came from the carpet of a vehicle. The police then analyzed the cars of individuals who were known to the family and had visited the house, but none of them matched the fibers. This led to the assumption that the fibers were from the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was discovered at the scene. At that time, fingerprinting and DNA technology had not yet advanced to the point where it could be compared to a database. However, the print was preserved for potential future use if a suspect was later identified. In Polly's room, a piece of fabric resembling silk was also found. The fabric had a distinctive pattern and appeared to have been cut from a garment with scissors. The police believed this fabric could serve as a valuable clue in the future. A hair was discovered, but its origin remained unknown since DNA analysis was not advanced enough to thoroughly examine it at the time. Polly's case generated one of the largest searches in the United States at that time. Thousands of volunteers joined the search, with 4,000 people combing neighborhoods, vacant lots, and large estates near her home. The police also attempted to locate drivers matching the suspect's description, but all did not bring any results. The police had a narrow 24-hour window to locate Polly after her disappearance, as chances of finding her alive would significantly decrease beyond that time frame. To expedite the investigation, they handed the case over to the FBI and launched an urgent search. However, as the days went by, hopes of a safe recovery of Polly began to dwindle. During the investigation, police inquired about witnesses in the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual on the night of the abduction. Several neighbors reported seeing a suspicious individual lurking around the area, describing him as peculiar-looking. They didn't think much of it at the time because they had no reason to believe the man was capable of committing a serious crime like kidnapping. As a result, they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The police shared a sketch of the suspect with the neighbors, based on a description provided by Polly's friends. The neighbors all recognized the man in the sketch. In a separate investigation, the police also questioned the teachers and staff at Polly's school to see if anyone knew the man or had any information about Polly's disappearance. Unfortunately, no one at the school had any knowledge about the man or the incident surrounding Polly's disappearance. The staff members all had alibis for the time in question and none of them matched the description or resembled the sketch of suspects. The police have conducted a thorough and comprehensive investigation of the case, they comparing a fiber found in Polly's house to the car mats of teachers and school staff vehicles, but unfortunately, no matches were found. Over time, feelings of hopelessness and fear grew, not only for Polly's family but also for the authorities and the general public. Everyone is concerned about the threat this criminal may pose to society, so they demand that the police quickly solve the case. To gather more information, a $200,000 reward was offered to anyone providing information that could aid in locating Polly. This reward was funded by actress Winona Ryder, who also held a press conference to publicly appeal kidnapper for Polly's safe return. At the time, the internet was still in its early stages, and law enforcement agencies, including the police and the FBI, were unfamiliar with using the internet to locate missing persons. To assist in the investigation, 3 individuals from California took matters into their own hands. They created and posted a picture of Polly, a sketch of her suspected kidnapper, and an advertisement for a reward for any information that could lead to her safe return. Although social media platforms did not exist at the time, other online communication tools were available. As a result, approximately 25 million people in the United States viewed Polly's picture online. Initially, FBI investigators believed that the internet could play a crucial role in the investigation. Although the disappearance became increasingly well known, but internet users do not bring any valuable information. However, this has attracted many volunteers to help, and telephone switchboards were established with hundreds of information every day. This thing also brings hope in the families of other missing children, who reached out to Polly's family to support and assistance, hoping that by working together, they might be able to find their own missing children. The investigators were growing increasingly frustrated. It has been many weeks since Polly was kidnapped, and they had yet to uncover any leads. The identity of the kidnapper remained a mystery, and without any DNA evidence, they were unable to make a match. Not even a hair or palm print had been left found, leaving them feeling helpless. Finally, a new breakthrough in the case has come. A phone call was called to Polly's father, Mark. On the other end of the line, he heard a girl's voice that sounded uncannily like his daughter's. She claimed to be Polly and told Mark that she was being held at a hotel. The kidnapper had momentarily left her alone, and that's why she was able to contact T. However, before Mark could glean any more information, the girl hung up. Mark immediately rushed to the police station to tell the news. Unfortunately, the FBI at the time lacked the advanced technology to track a call that had already been disconnected. All they could do was wait anxiously for the kidnapper to make another move, so they can only sit and wait for a new call, hoping to trace it. A few hours after the first call, the same girl who had spoken to Mark called again. The police managed to trace the call, but found it odd that the location was not a hotel, as the girl claimed, but a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived and knocked on the door of the house where the call originated, they discovered it was a prank. It turned out a teenage girl, close to Polly's age, lived there, so their voices were similar. She explained that her friends had dared her to do it. The girl was not arrested or taken to the police station. Instead, her parents were advised to monitor her behavior and remind her not to joke about such serious issues. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly disappeared, police received a call from a woman. She reported that she found 3 suspicious items on a several-acre plot of land she owned. The police, along with the FBI, went to the location and found 3 critical pieces of evidence: a piece of silk identical to one in Polly's room, a pair of ballet shoes that Eva claimed were missing from the house the night Polly vanished, and some duct tape. These evidence led the police to suspect that Polly might have been in the area. Before all this evidence was discovered, on the day Polly disappeared, the same woman went to the police to report a problem. Strangers had been wandering onto her plot of land. She owned a lot of land, which was mostly forest, and had only one small house inside. Although there were signs indicating it was private property, there was no fence to keep people out, so many unknowingly crossed onto her land. Although her land had many intruders, but one particular out in her memory. On the night Polly was abducted, a man drove up to her house in his car, which got stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, was the first to notice the man but didn't approach him because she was too scared. The homeowner also didn't approach him, as she thought he looked angry. They decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, they interrogated the man about why he was there. He explained that he hadn't realized it was private property and promised to leave quickly. However, he requested their assistance in getting his car out of the mud. The officers noticed that the man seemed very nervous, scared, and sweaty, and he also appeared to be under the influence of drugs. Since they were unable to conduct a drug test at the time and the man was not acting aggressively, they were unable to arrest him. The officers helped him out of the mud, and he eventually drove away. This man was Richard Allen Davis, born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was troubled due to the violence inflicted by his parents. When he was 12, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him, saying she wanted nothing to do with him, and left him with his father. Richard's father was very irresponsible, often leaving the house for hours or even days. Richard was frequently left alone, sometimes staying with neighbors and sometimes staying with some of his relatives. During his teenage years, Richard began engaging in criminal activities such as stealing and fighting, which led to several months in reform school. At 17, Richard committed a violent robbery that almost resulted in the victim's death. The judge offered him a choice: go to reform school or join the U.S. Army. Richard chose the Army but was dishonorably discharged in less than 2 years. As he grew older, his criminal record grew longer. Around the age of 20, he was sentenced to 15 years for robbery and kidnapping, but was released after 1 year on parole for good behavior. During that period, Richard was troubled by another accusation. Many of his friends suspected him of killing a 19-year-old girl named Marlene, even though the police acknowledged that she had left voluntarily. However, those close to Marlene believed Richard was responsible for her death, occurring the night they attended a party together. These were merely rumors, with no evidence to support them. When Polly went missing, Richard was having a difficult time, and he had no fixed address, so his whereabouts were unclear. The police distributed a special leaflet exclusively to officers, urging them to be extremely cautious. They withheld information from the media due to concerns that Richard might flee California or even the United States. On November 13, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol. A police officer stopped him, and he failed a breathalyzer test. Upon checking Richard's name and picture, the officer recognized him as the suspect wanted in the Polly kidnapping case. The officer carefully informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating probation due to drunk driving. Richard complied and was taken to the police station. There, officers read him his rights and revealed that he was actually being held for the kidnapping of Polly. Richard was taken in for questioning. The investigation was careful and he eventually admitted to kidnapping Polly. His palm print matched exactly with the one found at Polly's house, and carpet fibers from his car matched those found in the house. Polly's friends were brought to the police station for questioning and immediately identified Richard as the kidnapper. Additionally, a piece of silk identical to one found in Polly's room was discovered in his car and on the piece of land of the woman who reported the incident to the police. All evidence pointed to Richard, leading he to finally confess. He explained that he had been using substances with friends that day and felt unwell. He decided to break into a house in a neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around until he reached Polly's neighborhood. Seeing an open window, he entered the house. He stated that he hadn't planned the incident, didn't know Polly or her family, and hadn't been following them. He was searching for valuables but didn't find much. As he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard noted that she was very frightened and, in his panic, decided to take her. He stated that he put Polly in his car and started driving, eventually stopping in a vacant lot where he assaulted her. Afterwards, he got back into the driver's seat. When the woman and the babysitter spotted Richard on private piece of land, Polly was in the back seat. Police officers helped him retrieve his car from the mud, and at that point, Polly was still alive, which deeply frustrated officers as they believed her life could have been saved. After the car was pushed out of the mud, Richard drove down the highway, strangled Polly to death, and left her body there. Richard reported the exact location of the grave to the police, leading to a search that took place on December 4, 1993, 2 months 3 days after the girl was abducted. Polly's body was found in a grave beside the highway, dug by Richard himself. The forensic examination mainly confirmed the cause of death as strangulation, consistent with Richard's account. The date of her death was approximately the same day she disappeared. With all the evidence, Richard Allen Davis was put on trial for kidnapping, murdering, and raping Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. Besides apologizing to the family, he accused Polly's father of sexually abusing her. Richard claimed that Polly had told him not to do to her what her father did to her. This accusation enraged Polly's father, who nearly attacked Richard, but the people present compartmented him. Richard's words shocked everyone, not only because he didn't apologize but also because they doubted the truth of his claim about Polly's father. On June 18, 1996, Richard Allen Davis was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Polly Klaas. In August, he was sentenced to death. He tried to overturn the death sentence but failed. In 2006, Richard overdosed on pills in his cell but was revived and returned to prison. In 2009, his lawyer attempted to appeal his conviction to the Supreme Court but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago, to a loving family. In 2002, when Kelly was 16, her parents decided to divorce, but they remained on friendliness terms for her sake. The divorce was a traumatic incident that significantly impacted her life. A year later, she graduated from high school, but she unsure of her future plans. She took a break before college and worked part-time at a restaurant. In 2008, at 22, Kelly made a big decision to move to another city to start a new life. She chose Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which was about an hour from Chicago and reminded her of her hometown. The city was the largest in Wisconsin in terms of population, offering great opportunities. Kelly quickly made new friends, attended college, and got a job as a yoga instructor to pay for her tuition and accommodation. She also worked occasionally as a babysitter to tackle financial difficulties. As a child, Kelly loved visiting all the trendy, interesting, and popular places in the city. She enjoyed her life new and was making big plans for the future. The last time Kelly saw her father was a month before she disappeared, when he visited her in Milwaukee. At that time, Kelly had graduated and was working as a yoga instructor and sales clerk in a sports store. Her friends and co-workers admired her upbeat and fun personality. Kelly appeared to be happy and content with her life. She loved her job and had been in a relationship with Chris Sacco for a year. Chris was a 38-year-old successful IT manager at a trucking company. He graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business. He had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for his job. Chris was a hardworking, decent person and have a good family. Both Kelly and Chris shared a love for sports and entertainment, seemed they like a perfect couple. Chris was already enjoying a successful career, a luxurious apartment, an expensive car, and a reasonable fortune that he had earned independently. During the investigation, detectives found that Kelly had no enemies or anyone wishing her harm. All her belongings were left at home, which ruled out the possibility of her running away. What was troubling was the complete lack of activity on her bank accounts and phone. This led police to speculate that she might be in danger. The last person to see her on October 10, 2013, was her boyfriend Chris, so the investigators asked him to come to the station for an interrogation. Chris explained that they met at his luxury apartment in Lafayette Towers, spent some time there, and left around 8 p.m. They then went to a small bar across the street from his apartment, where Chris and Kelly mingled with others and enjoyed a drink. In good spirits, they returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m. and went to bed. Kelly left at 9 a.m., and they never saw each other again. Chris emphasized that he did not consider Kelly his girlfriend. They had an open relationship, and he was truly in love with another woman. This made the investigators curious. While Chris's story seemed quite believable, something about his words and behavior was suspicious, prompting the police to scrutinize him more closely. Detectives interviewed friends who were with Chris and Kelly that night. The friends confirmed that they all had a great time together. First, they went to the bar, and then they went outside, ordered a pizza because they were hungry, and ate it on a bench. Kelly was in a good mood and shared her plans for her day off, which included catching up on sleep, doing yoga, doing laundry, and resting. Later, Chris and Kelly went home, and they invited a friend over for another drink. The friend said she felt uncomfortable in Chris's apartment. She had a few drinks and later decided to leave. That night, Chris was smoking and chatting with a friend, while Kelly seemed a bit down. The friend thought Kelly was just tired and decided to leave the apartment to give them space. After speaking with Kelly's other girlfriends, the investigator discovered that the relationship between Chris and Kelly was not as good as it appeared. Kelly was genuinely in love with Chris, but he didn't seem as invested. Chris wasn't making any plans for a future together, which concerned Kelly. She suspected he might be having an affair and thought they might break up soon. As a result, Kelly felt there was no future with Chris and began looking for other options. She signed up for a dating site and began chatting with different guys, although she hadn't met them in person yet. Kelly's friends pointed out that they had seen bruises on her arms and neck. Curiously, when they asked about the bruises, Kelly always turned it into a joke, called it a crazy night, and immediately changed the subject. Her friends suspected these could be signs of violence, but Kelly never confirmed this thing. By that time, CCTV footage from Chris's house had been reviewed. It showed Chris and Kelly returning drunk to the apartment at night. But Kelly was never seen leaving. This footage contradicted Chris's claim that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the following morning. Turns out another friend of Chris had been in the apartment that night and said he'd done substances with Chris. With this information, the detectives got a search warrant for the apartment and went to Chris's house. Inside, they found various substances, pills, pipes, and other items, and arrested Chris for possession. The detectives also noticed something odd, a torn curtain in the bathroom. The curtain was missing, and the hooks where it hung were damaged, as if the curtain had been forcefully ripped off. During the interrogation, Chris appeared calm and confirmed that he had used substances, but he denied trading them. The police accessed Chris's cell phone and started investigating it. They found frightening materials, photos of a naked, unconscious girl on his bed, as well as a video of Chris sexually abusing the girl and seemingly strangling her. They suspicions that Chris was drugging the girl to take advantage of her. These materials were included as evidence in the case of Kelly's disappearance. The police went back to Chris's apartment with a cadaver-sniffing dog. The dog signaled at the bed and the bathroom in the apartment, and then pointed towards the front door. Later, it led the officers to Chris's car in the parking lot, as well as to some trash bins. By then, the investigators were already sure that the missing person was dead, and Chris became the main suspect in the case. She spent the last minutes of her life in his apartment, and then he took her body out and transported it in a car. It's still not known how Chris managed to discreetly get Kelly's body into the car without being caught by any of the 28 security cameras. While the police continued investigating, they checked Chris's computer and found explicit photos of babies. He was charged with possession of this material. At that time, Chris was out on bail awaiting trial, and investigators were still looking for evidence in Kelly's body to charge him. Remembering what Chris had told them about another girl he was secretly dating, detectives began to look into his double life. The young woman was named Megan, and she had been dating Chris for about 3 years. However, Megan doesn't know that Kelly is involved in Chris's life. The detectives went to talk to Megan and showed her photos of Chris's apartment. Upon examining them closely, Megan realized that some things were missing. In the bathroom, there was no shower curtain, rug, or several towels. In the bedroom, a large golf bag that was always kept there was missing. Based on the description, the detectives assumed that Kelly's body could have fit in such a bag. After reviewing all the building's entrances and exits, the police determined that Chris could have used an alternative path to reach the car without being seen. It seems he had thoroughly studied the house beforehand to plan this path. Parking lot camera footage captured Chris arriving with a large bag, which he placed in the trunk. He drove away from the house at 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, and at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone was permanently disconnected at the same location. Over the following 8 hours, footage showed Chris returning to the house multiple times, loading items into his car, finally he leaving at 6:16 p.m. He did not come back until the next day. When investigators asked him about the items he was transporting, Chris claimed he was moving his summer sports equipment to his mother's house. However, no one believed his explanation. That day at 7:30 p.m., Chris was supposed to meet Megan. However, she reported that he was over an hour late. Detectives suspected that during this time, Chris was searching for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which explained his tardiness. Tracking Chris's movements was impossible because his phone had been turned off since the morning. Being an experienced IT professional, Chris likely knew that keeping his phone on would make police it easy to trace his location through phone records. Megan testified that Chris was acting differently that night. He appeared agitated and nervous. He was fiddling with his phone and said it wasn't working, which made him late. After their date, they went to Megan's apartment and stayed the night. Chris was so stressed that he couldn't sleep and was sweating heavily, so much so that Megan had to change the sheets in the morning. The investigators believed Chris was anxious because Kelly's body was still in his trunk, making him fearful of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide Kelly's remains. On the morning of October 12th, he said goodbye to Megan and departed. Earlier, he had tried to persuade Megan to urgently move with him to another city, Denver, but she declined. The police officers tracked Chris's location using the car's GPS and found that he was heading to a place called Cheese House, a cheese store located 130 kilometers from Milwaukee. It seemed unusual for Chris to drive such a long distance early in the morning just to buy cheese. However, Chris claimed he went there to purchase cheese for his parents, and he even had a receipt showing a purchase at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th. His parents confirmed he had indeed brought them cheese. Still, it was hard to believe his story, because the same type of cheese could easily have been bought at a local supermarket nearby. The police suspected this area was where Chris had hidden Kelly's body. It was later revealed that Chris stopped at a sports store around noon on his way back and bought new sneakers, which raised suspicions. Detectives thought this was intentional. They believed Chris wanted to dispose of an old pair of shoes because it might have blood on them, or at the spot where he hid Kelly's body there may have been footprints from his old sneakers. Chris considered everything carefully and got rid of all the evidence, creating an alibi for himself. He is very good at analysis and wanted to commit the perfect crime, but the investigators were able to prove he was lying. The distance from the cheese store to the sports shop was about 80 kilometers, a trip he would have made in around an hour. So why did he show up at the store more than 2 hours later? All signs pointed to him doing something else for another hour, probably hiding the body. Police believe Chris hid the bag containing Kelly's body somewhere along the route and disposed of it there. The police were looking for Kelly, but without a specific location, the search was difficult and inconclusive. The entire 80 kilometers route was the search area, which was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, in November 2014, Chris Sacco went on trial for possessing illegal substances and explicit photos of children. He pleaded guilty and received a 19-year prison sentence. The roadside search continued, and they eventually succeeded. A local resident walking in a wooded area about 60 kilometers from the city discovered human remains near the road. Dental records later confirmed them as those of Kelly Dwyer. The resident quickly reported the discovery to the sheriff's office, who immediately suspected it was Kelly's body, which they had been searching for in that area for a long time. The discovery finally ended the search for Kelly, bringing some peace to her parents after a year and a half. Now, they needed to seek justice for her and determine the exact cause of death. The cause could not be identified from the skeleton alone. The medical examiner suggested that the girl might have been strangled, but the force was not strong enough, so the hyoid bone was not broken. There was no evidence at the location where the body was found, no torn curtain, mat, towels, or even a bag. However, the position of the body was unusual. The skeleton was found face down, with one arm under the torso, and the legs bent, suggesting the body had been in a narrow space for some time after death. This further confirmed that Kelly had been hidden in that golf bag. Chris was seen on his home cameras with the bag and also driving down the road with it, disposing of the body, but all of this was circumstantial evidence. There was no direct proof that Chris had committed the crime, so the detectives continued to investigate the case. They were not in a rush because he was already in jail. It was not until 5 years after Kelly's disappearance that he was finally charged. The charges were negligent homicide and hiding the body. The police could not prove that the murder was planned in advance. They believed that on that night, the situation was similar to what investigators found in a video. Chris became intimate with her, lost control during strangulation, and accidentally killed her. He then tore down the bathroom curtain, rug, and towels, wrapped the body, put it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of the body. Chris claimed he was innocent of Kelly's murder. During the trial, CCTV footage was shown, along with a video from Chris's cell phone capturing the strangulation, and evidence from a canine inspection of his apartment was presented. Megan, who testified against him, stated he was unusually nervous and late for a meet on that day. Chris's ex-girlfriends also testified, saying he had a disturbing fascination with choking and rough sex, which frightened them. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence against Chris and that the prosecution just was based on speculation. They highlighted that Chris had no previous arrests or convictions, except for a substance possession case. He was a successful IT professional and valued employee with a respectable family, and they contended he was not capable of murder. Not all CCTV recordings were preserved before the trial, so the prosecution couldn't prove for sure that Kelly hadn't left the house. The defense even brought forward a witness during the trial who claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Kelly the weekend after she disappeared, in another man's car. They had seen her picture on TV as a missing person, but the witness wasn't completely sure it was her. All of this led the lawyer to hypothesize that Kelly left Chris' apartment and was then set up by one of her new boyfriends met through the dating website. The defense counsel argued that there is no way to confirm what exactly the dog detected because there is no video recording. As a result, which could be subjective. In contrast, the prosecution countered that the observe was conducted as objectively as possible, with many police officers present, and they all agreed on the results. At that time, Kelly had already stopped communicating, was not answering calls or messages, and was not active on social media, which was unusual for her, suggesting she was already dead. The prosecutor persuaded the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. Chris was the only one who could have done it, and he cleverly planned everything and disposed of the evidence, leaving no direct proof of his involvement. The jury deliberated for a long time but ultimately found Chris Sacco guilty of first-degree negligent homicide and concealing the body. Kelly's family and the prosecution requested the maximum sentence of 48 years in prison, while the defense attorney asked for the sentence to be reduced to 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, aged 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing the body. He is currently held at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065 at the age of 90. Chris attempted to appeal the sentence, but his appeals were denied. Kelly's family is satisfied with the sentence, as it effectively means he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shertha and Leon Britz. Our story takes place in a small town called PAF, South Africa, with a population of about 3,000 people. In 1979, Leon Britz was born there. He had a brother named Toki. Their father owned a local hotel and other businesses, providing a comfortable living for the family. Leon was a bright and hardworking student who excelled in school and was active in sports. As a teenager, he started working in the family's hotel, learning to manage the business and assisting his father. Once his brother was old enough, the Leon brothers worked together. The Leon were a close-knit family, respected throughout the area. When Toki turned 18, he left their small town, but Leon remained with his parents. Leon dreamed of taking over the family hotel business, which frequently hosted large events and parties. At one of these events, Leon noticed a stunning girl with chestnut hair and eyes. He couldn't stop looking at her and decided to introduce himself. However, the girl, Shertha, had just turned 14, although she appeared older, while Leon was already 25. Shertha was born on September 6, 1990, and was the youngest of 4 siblings. Suritha's family lived in poverty, and their situation became worse when her father died of a poisonous spider bite. Her mother was left to raise 3 children on her own. Shertha endured hardships with her family for many years. Suritha's family barely had enough money to buy food, making the future of the children very bleak. Then Leon, who came from a wealthy family, met Shertha and fell in love with her despite their large age gap. Shertha, a schoolgirl, was also drawn to Leon. They started talking, and Leon pursued her with extravagance, taking her to fancy places and giving her expensive gifts. This left a strong impression on Shertha, who was extremely grateful to Leon. She realized she could build a future with him without lacking anything. Their relationship blossomed as Shertha enjoyed Leon's attention, and Leon loved her very much. A few months later, Leon expressed his wish to marry Shertha, and his mother approved after meeting her. They then began dating officially, and their relationship seemed perfect. However, when Shertha turned 15, her classmates noticed changes in her behavior. She started wearing loose-fitting clothes, avoided showing her belly, and became very shy, as if she didn't want to be approached. Eventually, Shertha told Leon that she suspected she might be pregnant. Leon was very upset, as a pregnancy could result in accusations of statutory rape since he was already 26 years old. Leon, who controlled the relationship, had initiated their intimacy. To address Suritha's suspicions, he gave her money to visit the clinic, where the doctor confirmed she was pregnant with twins. When she told Leon the news, he became angry and insisted she not keep the pregnancy, giving her money for an abortion. Despite her hesitation, the pressure from Leon and their age difference compelled her to comply. She went to the clinic alone and followed Leon's demands. Leon wasn't opposed to having a family and children, but he believed everything had its proper time and that they should wait until she was at least an adult. After the procedure, when Shurtha returned from the clinic, her mental health was severely impacted. Leon thought that taking walks would help her recover quickly, not realizing she was in a lot of pain. Her emotional recovery needed more time. Shurtha eventually overcame the trauma, and their romantic relationship continued. Leon still wanted children but asked her to wait. By the end of 2008, Shurtha was in her final year of school, preparing for her exams. At 18, she became pregnant again and told Leon about it. Leon was unhappy once more, but this time, Shurtha refused to have another abortion. She was now old enough to make her own decisions. Shurtha insisted on keeping the child and decided not to follow Leon's wishes. He agreed. She graduated from school in early 2009 while pregnant. Shurtha and Leon decided to get married. Although Leon was uncertain about marriage, they had come too far in their relationship, so they went ahead with the wedding. Shurtha had her first child a year later, twin boys. The couple was very happy. After the twins were born, Leon's father passed away, and his mother began to suffer from age-related problems that made it difficult for her to manage the family business. Leon and his brother decided to put their mother in a nursing home so that she could receive proper care. Leon then took full control of the hotel. During this time, he also owned a mining equipment store and a restaurant, both of which were aimed at serving miners by providing food at their workplaces. He also owned rental properties. These ventures generated a good income for the family, allowing them to live comfortably. Due to his heavy workload, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business. He didn't pressure her, as she had already wanted to start working in business. Leon entrusted her with managing the equipment store. She began handling supplies while caring for their two young children, which made managing the business challenging. Although she couldn't take on a large workload, she managed to handle her responsibilities effectively. By this time, the children had grown up and started school. In South Africa, getting an education can be a challenge as not every small town has educational facilities and the quality is often subpar. Ensuring the best quality education often requires daily travel between cities. However, Suritha's family rented a house in a nearby major city for the duration of the children's schooling. Leon decided to send the children to Kakumahi with Shurtha. She had to take care of the children herself and give up her business. They only visited Leon on weekends to spend time with him. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time, the distance between the spouses became more apparent. The children couldn't communicate with their father regularly, and Shurtha rarely saw her husband. Their relationship grew much colder than it was at the beginning of their marriage. In 2017, Shurtha began experiencing health issues. She was diagnosed with cancer, heart problems, and arthritis. She underwent surgery to remove the tumor, which saved her life by preventing the disease from progressing. To address her other health issues, Shurtha started traveling to Johannesburg every month to receive special treatments from specialists at a clinic. All of this was funded by Leon, who genuinely wanted to help Shurtha and supported her while continuing to manage the business. The biggest challenge during this period was taking care of the children, but the couple solved it by hiring a nanny to help. The family business was very profitable, and Leon's workplace and home were both equipped with safes. Thanks to the extensive business, Leon became wealthy, but at the cost of having to work long hours without days off. In addition, getting rich in a poor country is very dangerous. Because he had unintentionally attracted many people who were jealous of his life. Starting in 2017, Leon encountered problems in his business, which led to many people publicly threatening him. At this time, Leon confided in his wife that he felt unsafe and feared for his life. The couple discussed these issues regularly to ease his anxiety, but the situation did not improve. Gradually, the threats became a regular occurrence. Leon began to ignore the threatening messages, as they came almost every day over trivial matters. A few years later, a terrible tragedy occurred on October 7, 2020. After a brief phone call with Shurda, her husband returned home to check on the dogs. He then stopped communicating, which worried Shurda. She decided to go home to check on him. That day, after arriving home and going inside, the house was strangely quiet and empty. Shurda searched every room and finally discovered Leon's body floating in the pool. In shock, she contacted Leon's brother and then called the police to report her husband's death. Leon's brother and the hotel manager were the first to arrive at the scene of the tragedy, followed shortly by the police. It was clear that Leon's death was no accident. He had been brutally beaten before falling into the pool, suggesting that it was likely a targeted killing. Police quickly noticed that apart from a broken safe, no valuables had been stolen, despite the fact that there were plenty of items worth stealing in the house. This seemed unusual, as thieves usually stole anything of value. The case quickly attracted widespread attention and became a major topic in the South African media. Social networks are full of rumors and speculation. Rumor has it that the businessman has many serious enemies and has received threats. Some say that people who had quarrels with Leon may have been involved in the case. The police receive reports from random people every day, and it takes them a long time to process so many false complaints. Initially, Leon's brother Toki was suspected of being the culprit because he was seen at the crime scene shortly before Leon's death. The suspected motive was their mother's will, which was kept in Leon's safe, and Toki wanted to amend the document for fear of losing his inheritance. At the time, their mother was seriously ill and left a will. The police attempted to prove that there had been serious conflicts between them over the matter, but they were unsuccessful. Toki insisted that there had been no conflict, saying that his meetings with Leon were very normal and that they did not usually argue about money. Toki sought comfort from Shurda, who believed he was innocent and promised to find him the best lawyer. The housekeeper knew about the cameras in the house and informed the police, which gave them access to the footage. They also collected recordings from cameras at the entrance to the house. Briso Shurid, the housekeeper, was brought to the station to help identify the people in the footage. But she was unable to recognize anyone. The police had no solid leads. Leon's brother Toki remains a suspect due to a possible inheritance dispute, but without evidence against him, the case has been dropped. A few months later, Jacques van Vuren, 37, contacted the police and told the whole truth about Leon's murder. Because the criminal wanted to confess, in exchange for a lighter sentence, and agreed to expose all his accomplices. It turned out that in the Shurda family, things were not as rosy as they seemed. The couple's distance not only cooled their relationship, but also completely destroyed it. One day, Shurda took her husband's mobile phone and discovered photos of other women. At that time, she herself was unfaithful to Leon. Shurda was beautiful and attracted to many men. At the time of her marriage, she had a brief relationship with a lover. But during her medical treatment in Johannesburg, she developed a more serious relationship. She visited her lover every time she went to the hospital for treatment, during which time their relationship deepened. She considered leaving her husband. This seemed pretty straightforward since they lived in separate homes and rarely communicated. Not long after, she asked her husband for a divorce. It is unclear whether she simply wanted to end her relationship with her husband to be with her lover or whether she intended to marry him. Leon did not know about the betrayal, but he was shocked by his wife's desire for a divorce. At first, he reacted very violently and expressed his grief. Then he calmed down and threatened that if she filed for divorce, he would take everything from her, including money and children. Memories of her poor childhood still haunted her. Due to pressure from her husband, Shurtha had to give up her plans. She no longer loved her husband Leon, but she did not want to lose everything. In desperation, Shurtha turned to her lover, who lived near Johannesburg, to see if he could help her leave her husband. She repeatedly asked him for help, but he refused. He tried to convince her that it was a bad idea. Eventually, she stopped making these requests. One day, Shurtha was talking to her lover. During the conversation, she said that she no longer had to worry about her husband because a classmate was willing to help resolve the situation. At first, her lover took these words as a joke and the couple never brought up the subject again. However, it was not a joke. Shurtha was actually talking to her classmate, Jacques van Vuren. At the time, Jacques was going through a difficult time. He had just divorced and his ex-wife had moved out with the children. He had also been injured at work, forcing him to reduce his hours and income. Despite this, he still had to pay child support, which led to serious financial difficulties. In the face of these difficulties, Jacques relapsed into drug addiction, which drove his wife away from him. Shurtha and Jacques met again by chance at a barbecue, where he confided in her about his troubles. Shurtha decided to take advantage of this opportunity. She had obtained Jacques' phone number. Shurtha contacted Jacques. She said that her husband had been abusing her for years, so she wanted to get away from his control. And Jacques believed her. He was extremely disgusted by Leon's behavior. Shurtha had reached Jacques' limit, as he had had a difficult childhood. He lived with an abusive father who had physically and mentally abused him, leaving him traumatized, and Suritha's story was effective. Finally, he agreed to help Shurtha resolve her situation. She promised to pay 400,000 rand, a large sum that could help Jacques solve all his financial problems. During this time, Leon's business was struggling. His hardware store and restaurant had also closed. The estate was abandoned and did not generate any income. The Leon family had been living off their savings, but with the high costs of maintaining their lifestyle, their financial reserves began to run out. In this context, Leon often quarreled with his wife. Their relationship began to fall apart, which only made the situation worse. Finally, Shurtha decided to get rid of her husband again. She contacted Jacques, who asked for half the money in advance. Shurtha withdrew 70,000 rand and met Jacques to discuss the plan. She promised to give the remaining money through her housekeeper, who worked for Leon and had moved into her house to help with the housework. The next day, she gave Jacques an envelope containing 1,000 rand. With the deposit, Jacques hired his university friend Enrich Williams. Enrich initially refused to participate in the murder, but due to financial difficulties, when Jacques offered him a large sum of money, he could not resist and agreed. Enrich was 34 at the time and worried that he couldn't handle Leon on his own. So he found a place to stay, Amantel Bariki, a recent college graduate. Amantel, just 24, had studied engineering and dreamed of building his own house. Like many others, he was struggling financially. When he was told of the amount of money involved, Amantel agreed to help. Then the plan entered a careful preparation phase. Shurtha filmed a video showing the layout of the house and discussed the attack with the criminals. Shurtha let the criminals into the house so they could hide behind a large sofa in the living room. Her role was to lure her husband into the house while she was receiving treatment in Johannesburg. Jacques was not allowed in the area because witnesses could identify him as a friend of the couple. So Enrich and Amantel had to carry out the attack. Shurtha insisted that the attack looked like a robbery, so she allowed the criminals to take whatever they wanted from the house. She also asked that Suritha's beloved dogs be kept safe. To distract the dogs, they bought a package of sausages. The sausages were scattered around the yard to lure the dogs away. A rehearsal was scheduled for early October, but was cancelled when Leon's brother Toki visited on October 5th and stayed overnight. The attackers had everything ready and planned to burn clothes and any other evidence after the murder to avoid leaving any clues for the police. While waiting for the signal to start, Jacques tried to calm down. He broke his rule of staying away from the area where Leon would be killed by driving past the house several times before returning to wait for the signal to continue. At around 6 a.m. the next day, while Leon was at work, the attackers entered the house and hid behind the sofa. At 10 a.m., Shurda called Leon to say that, according to the housekeeper, the dogs were missing. Leon needed to go back to look for them, which seemed normal to him, so he returned to the house, unaware that his attackers were waiting inside. As Leon entered the living room and turned around, the attack began. He was stabbed in the back by a mantle with a knife. Despite being caught off guard, Leon fought back. During the struggle, Enrich grabbed a baseball bat and began beating Leon. Leon fell to the ground. He was stabbed 8 times, and then they used a dog collar to strangle him to death before stealing his wallet. They then carried Leon and threw him into the pool. Then went back into the house, opened the safe, and stole money in diamonds. They fled the scene after carrying out their plan. At the time, Shurda was in Johannesburg for treatment, which gave her an alibi. After learning about the incident, Shurda returned home, where she discovered her husband's body. Later, when Shurda was invited to the police station to view the surveillance camera footage, she noticed her old school friend Jacques in the video. Although his face was not visible, the footage captured his car driving suspiciously past their house twice. Shurda did not claim to recognize the car, but the police took notice of it, although the license plate was unclear. While the investigation was ongoing, Shurda used a disposable phone to avoid detection and keep their conversations from being monitored. It turned out that Shurda had provided the police with information regarding Toki and tried to blame him for her husband's death. Shurda had gone to great lengths to play the role of a grieving widow. Even after the funeral, Toki remained unsuspecting and continued to contact Shurda, supporting her during this difficult time. During this time, Toki began to notice significant changes in Suritha's behavior. She no longer appeared to be a grieving widow. In fact, she had gotten a tattoo, despite Leon's constant objection to her getting one. In addition, Shurda began riding a motorcycle, which Leon was also adamantly against. She began wearing more revealing and provocative clothing, along with heavy, aggressive makeup, which had always annoyed Leon when he was alive. Despite all these changes, Toki remains unaware of Suritha's involvement in the crime. During this time, Shurda suffered financial hardship as her family assets were frozen due to the ongoing investigation. She was unable to pay the remaining 200,000 rand to the killers and had no personal savings. The killers became angry and began to threaten her. Jacques regularly contacted her to demand money, but Shurda continued to delay payment by insisting that the assets were still frozen. The situation became so bad that she hired a bodyguard to move into her home. The bodyguard began helping to look after the children, leading neighbors to assume that he was her new partner. Jacques also received threats from Enrich and Amantel, the killers, as he was responsible for paying the remaining amount to them, but he could not do so without money from Shurda. On one occasion, Jacques went to visit his sister and received several threats along the way, which made him fearful. Under emotional pressure, he confessed to his sister about the murder, and she informed their mother. His sister then tried to convince him to go to the police and confess, and he finally agreed. This led to the full truth about the murder being revealed. When the police arrived at Suritha's house, she said that she was upset because Leon did not approve her divorce and refused to pay for her medical treatment. However, there was no evidence in their correspondence to substantiate her claims. The possible motive for her decision to kill her husband was that he was planning to sell the dilapidated hotel. She, who had become accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, did not want to sell it. Meanwhile, Leon's main goal in selling the hotel was to pay off his debts and spend more time with his family. He had neglected his children and wife, so he planned to retire and pursue a quieter, more settled life with them. Unfortunately, this decision eventually led to his death. Jacques Van Vuren was sentenced to 25 years in prison, eligible for parole in up to 5 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. In exchange for his cooperation, he agreed to testify against others involved in the massacre. Rich Williams and Amantal Bariki were also arrested and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Leon Britz. On March 19, 2021, police arrested Shirley Britz. She quickly pleaded guilty to murder and armed robbery. As a result, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder and 15 years in prison for armed robbery, both sentences to run concurrently. Because she pleaded guilty, she will have the opportunity to be paroled with minimal restrictions. Throughout the trial, Shirley portrayed herself as the victim in her relationship with Leon, which began when she was 14 years old. He pressured her to have an abortion and controlled many aspects of her life. Although there was no evidence of physical violence or suffering, the Supreme Court accepted her claims. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Andrew Steele. Ashley Kristen was born in California. From a young age, she helped her mother with housework and took care of her siblings. Her relatives appreciated her support, although childcare could be a challenge. Young Ashley was willing to help her mother in many ways, which helped her mature faster than her peers. This early maturity may have contributed to her first love story, which began when she was just 12 years old. She met a boy named Andrew Steele and they felt an immediate connection. Unlike many of her peers, Ashley was not into parties or frivolous activities. She was quite modest. Their relationship continued throughout high school and was serious from the start. After finishing high school, Ashley's family moved to Minnesota, but she and Andrew managed to maintain their relationship despite the distance. They kept in touch through phone calls and letters, seeing each other occasionally but not often. During this time, they focused on their studies and college preparation while still taking time to connect. They were both committed to building a future together, knowing that getting a degree was essential to their plans. After graduation, they planned to move in together and start a family. Their dreams began to come true in 1998 when Ashley graduated with her bachelor's degree. After receiving their degrees, they decided to have a wedding and planned a solemn event that they had been waiting for many years. Ashley and Andrew exchanged vows at the altar, and with rings exchanged, a new chapter began in their lives. Meanwhile, the young husband got a job with the county sheriff, while Ashley was completely absorbed in her work and continued to build a career in finance. At first, things went smoothly for Ashley. She demonstrated impressive expertise in her field and handled even the most challenging tasks with ease. After years of working in finance, she took a job as a teacher at a local preschool. The preschool environment allowed her to reconnect with her previous experiences caring for siblings. In the early 2000s, Ashley's dream came true when she welcomed 2 children, Jack and Rachel, into her family. The couple's love story seemed complete, but fate had other plans. During this time, Ashley began to notice worrying signs in her husband, Andrew. At first, she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. Although he tried to hide his struggles, everyone around him soon noticed. The tremors were so severe that he had difficulty holding objects. As his initial anxiety increased, Andrew began to have difficulty speaking and his hand tremors became more severe. Communicating with others became increasingly difficult, and at times he was completely unable to speak. Even simple daily tasks became difficult for him. At times, the tremors were so severe that Andrew had difficulty eating. His wife did everything she could to support him, standing by his side in his fight against the disease. But it was clear that he was losing. On June 4, 2014, Andrew received a life-changing diagnosis. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. At the age of 39, he was diagnosed with this rare, incurable disease that affects the central nervous system. ALS leads to degeneration of both upper and lower motor neurons, resulting in paralysis and muscle atrophy. Unfortunately, many people with the disease only have a life expectancy of 2 to 5 years after diagnosis. At this point in his life, Andrew was a deputy sheriff and everything was about to change for him and his family. As his health declined, Andrew struggled to perform his work duties. This deterioration worried his loved ones. They felt helpless as they watched his condition worsen. He was eventually laid off, which put even more strain on his family. At that time, the wife was not working, and for the first time, the family faced such difficulties that forced them to count cents. Ashley struggled to provide for her family. She worked part-time, but unfortunately her job paid very little. This made it difficult for her to make ends meet. During this difficult time, Ashley continued to care for her husband and protect their children. However, Andrew needed expensive medication and specialist medical equipment installed at home to improve his condition. Although the medication initially helped alleviate some of his symptoms, the costs were high and their financial situation became worse as they had to pay for these essentials. Despite their financial struggles, Ashley was determined to prolong her husband's life, maintain their standard of living, and provide for their family. To do this, they contacted a charity that supports patients with rare diseases. With an official diagnosis from a doctor, Andrew registered with the organization. Unfortunately, the charity was later shut down due to violations and possible financial fraud. This was a disastrous failure, especially since the charity had promised to cover the cost of installing medical equipment and the couple had pinned all their hopes on this support. After facing this challenge, the couple had to seek help from friends and acquaintances, as they felt they had no other choice. They needed to raise around $80,000. Andrew was surprised when people came together to support him. A friend suggested that Ashley take charge of the fundraising efforts. She created a special social media page where people could donate to her husband. She also held various contests and themed events to draw attention to their cause. This approach successfully raised funds and helped cover some of their expenses. Ashley remained determined to reach their goal until the very end. Her dedication stemmed from her desire to prolong her beloved husband's life. The outpouring of support from friends surprised Andrew, and he was grateful for their willingness to help him through his illness. He had never expected so many people to support him. Through this crowdfunding effort, they quickly raised over $23,000, which was used to purchase much-needed medical supplies. Eventually, the medical equipment installation for Andrew, a former police officer, was completed and the donations continued to pour in. Over time, Ashley became the manager and organizer of a large fundraising event. At first, she received little support, but over time, she was able to support other foundations working for similar causes. She constantly discussed her husband's condition and shared updates on social media. By this time, they had been married for 26 years, enjoying a long and happy life together. Doctors encouraged Andrew to do the things he had always wanted to do, but had not yet done. Andrew recalled a memory from his school years when he and his friends performed on stage, imitating the legendary rock band Guns N' Roses. He recalled the enthusiastic applause of the audience, making it the most thrilling moment of his life. He longed to experience that joy again. On August 16, 2014, Ashley and her friends held a concert to fulfill her husband's long-cherished dream. Thanks to invitations sent through the support fund, The entire group that had performed together decades ago reunited for the event. More than 300 people attended, and the musicians were moved to tears. The scale and importance of the event attracted media attention, as Andrew's battle with the disease was considered interesting by journalists and widely reported. Andrew's health was deteriorating and he was facing a tragic end. After giving the interview, Andrew decided to throw a farewell party for the two most important women in his life, his devoted wife Ashley and younger sister, Casey Tolles. The sisters looked very similar, differing only by age and hair color. Andrew invited both women to the party, which surprised Casey's husband because she was the only one going. However, this was considered the last wish of a dying man, so no one questioned it. On Friday, August 22, 2014, Ashley and Casey gathered at their home in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, to enjoy a weekend with him. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. However, around 1 p.m., Casey called 911 in a panic, trying to stay calm. On the phone, she reported that a shooting had occurred at her sister's house. She explained that Andrew had picked up a gun, shot her, then pointed it at his wife Ashley. She ran away from him and called for help. Police and ambulances rushed to Andrew's house. Outside the front door, they found Casey, wrapped in a towel. She was bleeding and bruised, crying that she was dying. She was quickly placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. The interior of the house was in disarray, making it difficult for the police to immediately understand the situation. Meanwhile, they returned to the house without realizing that Andrew was still inside and cautiously entered, gun drawn. They were unable to go out into the hallway due to the thick smoke that made it impossible to see. A perimeter was set up around the house to prevent anyone from entering or exiting undetected. A tactical team equipped with gas masks and equipment for extreme conditions arrived. Armed police surrounded the area. When the police called out to anyone inside with their hands up and received no response, they had no choice but to enter the house. They needed to act quickly, as something was clearly burning inside and the fire department was waiting outside. However, it was still too dangerous to put out the fire, as there could be people inside, including potential threats. In the couple's bedroom, the police found the body of a 30-year-old woman who had been shot in the head. A black tie was tightly wrapped around her neck. Although the task force arrived quickly, they were unable to save her. She died instantly from her injuries. The source of the smoke in the room was determined. Andrew had set up a portable grill inside, filled to the brim with charcoal, filling the room with thick, acrid smoke. Andrew himself was found lying on the floor next to the oven, with a pistol close to his hand. An officer moved his weapon aside, and at that moment, Andrew woke up. He had inhaled smoke and was severely impaired. The officer quickly subdued, handcuffed Andrew, and extinguished the oven. Andrew was rescued from the smoke-filled room just minutes before he died of smoke inhalation. During the 911 call, Casey mentioned that Andrew may have tried to end his life. She did not know what was going on in the couple's bedroom after younger sister's husband attacked her. According to Casey, after being shot, she heard more gunshots and saw Andrew pointing a gun at his wife's head. Casey then attempted to escape from the room, hoping that Andrew would be distracted and not notice her. She successfully hid in the basement and called emergency services. Meanwhile, Andrew was turning on the oven, intending to die of smoke inhalation. When the police arrested him, he was in very bad shape. He also had superficial wounds on his body. While investigating the events leading up to the brutal massacre, police discovered footage of Andrew purchasing 2 large bags of charcoal. It is unclear whether the attack on the 2 women was intentional. It was later discovered that Andrew had been planning a party, making the purchase of charcoal for grilling seem plausible. Ashley and Casey thought the items were for grilling, so no one found his purchases suspicious. Police are now faced with the daunting task of finding out why Andrew would commit such a horrific act against the people he claimed were his closest loved ones. Emergency crews rushed Casey, 38, to hospital, supporting her along the way, but she was unconscious. At the medical center, doctors fought for her life for hours on the operating table. Casey's injuries were so severe, she was sweating profusely. Unfortunately, she did not survive. Andrew, 39, was taken to a medical center under police guard. Fortunately, his injuries were not as serious as initially feared and were not life-threatening. He was released from hospital after a few days but was immediately arrested for double murder. Police suspect the crime was premeditated. That same day, Andrew made his first court appearance, conducted via video link. He was a respected sheriff's deputy who had become a suspect in a case that shocked the state for its senselessness and brutality. Andrew was arrested and his bail was set at $1 million. He was also banned from contacting his two children, aged 10 and 1, who are currently living with his wife's relatives. On September 11, 2014, the defendant appeared in court for his first in-person hearing. There was clear evidence linking the defendant to the murder of Ashley. The gun used in the crime contained only Andrew's DNA. The prosecution presented evidence that the murder was premeditated. They argued that Andrew had planned the crime for a long time. The main evidence supporting this claim was data from Andrew's cell phone, which contained numerous internet searches, including photos and videos of instructions on how to kill people, found on his device. Police discovered several online searches on Andrew's browser about effective and painless ways to kill people. Eventually, Andrew decided to use a gun. He chose a time when the children were visiting relatives to carry out his plan. Notably, he had written a will just one day before the attacks, suggesting he had planned to end his life after harming the women. However, things did not go as planned and Casey called for help. The only problem for the prosecution was that there was no clear motive. The couple was very much in love, and Andrew could not have profited from his wife's death. This also raised the question of why he would commit the murder when he himself was only expected to live a few months. Despite the substantial evidence against him, the court decided to continue the investigation and increased bail to $2 million. The trial was scheduled for April 13, 2015. However, on February 27, 2015, Andrew's health deteriorated significantly. He was brought into the courtroom for a preliminary hearing, where he pleaded not guilty, claiming amnesia. The defense argued that Andrew's illness left him unable to distinguish between good and evil, and between fact and fiction. He suffered from severe depression, which caused him to impulsively contemplate killing or react aggressively when provoked. Due to memory problems, the defendant was unable to recall these events and claimed that he had no control over what he did, attributing this loss of control to his deteriorating health. On March 27, 2015, Andrew amended his testimony. He admitted to killing his wife, Ashley, but maintained that he did not act out of malice. Instead, he claimed that his actions were entirely due to his medical condition. The defense faced a challenging task, as they needed to prove that Andrew's mental and emotional state had significantly deteriorated, as this contributed to the crime. They had to show a link between his illness and the murder, proving that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the double murder. To secure a favorable verdict, the defense had to convince at least 10 of the 12 jurors of Andrew's innocence. Now, the decision is in the hands of psychiatrists. Dr. Stephen Morse is responsible for assessing Andrew's condition. In his professional opinion, Andrew Steele's illness is not recognized as a mental disorder. Instead, it is a nervous system problem that can lead to cognitive and memory problems. However, there has never been a documented case of someone committing murder or acting aggressively due to this illness. On April 13, 2015, Andrew Steele's trial began. The defense quickly launched its defense, arguing that his medical condition was the primary cause of the tragic events, for which he was deeply remorseful. The attorney highlighted his professional achievements and best qualities. He recounted Andrew's struggle with a rare disease that eventually drove him insane, leading to the deaths of 2 women, presenting numerous friends and family members to testify in his favor. Acquaintances of the man testified that doctors had been monitoring the patient's condition for a long time. According to numerous witnesses, after the defendant learned of his fatal diagnosis, he fell into a deep depression. He was completely devastated, despite having an excellent relationship with his wife and children, as well as with friends. Unfortunately, fate decreed that he fell ill with a terrible disease, and he could have died. Against this background, the hero of the story significantly worsened his mental and emotional state, which could not go unnoticed. Witnesses said that for a long time, Andrew did not have problems with his memory, as the doctors had mentioned. However, these issues began on that fateful day in August 2014, which looked rather suspicious in the opinion of the prosecutor's office. This suspicion arose against the backdrop of the discovery of the man's notes, including a fresh will. All of this seemed to be part of an insidious plan, and the prosecution interpreted the text entries as preparation for murder. The prosecutor found confirmation of the assumptions about the premeditation of the crime, as well as evidence of a desire to voluntarily leave this life. This information became the main evidence on which the prosecutors relied. However, the defense did not lag behind in eloquence. According to the lawyer, these entries were evidence of the man's delirious state, which had begun long before the tragedy. He made spontaneous, incoherent notes that, if desired, could be interpreted in any way. The lawyer was sure that the evidence of the killer's innocence was on his mobile phone and tried to challenge the prosecution's opinion. The note about the will created by Andrew on August 21st, the day before the double murder, became a turning point in this court battle. The last time it was edited was on August 22nd at 6 a.m. The prosecutor's office claimed that the text contained direct references to a planned murder. The lawyers attempted to refute these claims, calling the text unrelated delirium. Unusual behavior of the criminal was confirmed by one of his sisters named Haley. The woman went on holiday with her brother and his wife sometime after Andrew learned of his diagnosis. During this period, when his sister was changing into a swimsuit and was in her personal room at the hotel, Andrew suddenly burst in. He just stood there for a while, looking at her with an empty gaze. Afterward, Haley came out, convinced that he was not himself. Similar incidents happened repeatedly. Several women from the prosecutor's office continued to insist that it was not typical for people with Andrew's illness to display cruelty and aggression. Before this episode, the disorder had never been considered a reason for an attack. However, according to the defense, it did not mean that the illness could not provoke anything like this at all, and it could proceed according to its own individual scenario. Andrew himself told a new, astonishing story of what happened at the trial. According to the defendant, that day he was going to engage in a sexual act with his wife while her sister was on the first floor. He claimed that Ashley liked strangulation during sex, so he used a black tie around her neck. However, in a fit of passion, he pulled it too tightly, and his wife began to choke. Andrew was unable to notice it in time. After that, Casey heard a suspicious noise upstairs and kicked down the bedroom door. Andrew remembered only that moment when she burst inside, and then there was a gap in his memory until the police arrived at the call. The confession seemed absurd. The deceased, Casey, told a completely different story during the 911 call. There was no damage to the bedroom door. It didn't look like it had been kicked in. The prosecutor's office provided several dozen photographs from the crime scene and the victim's body, revealing obvious discrepancies with the defendant's testimony. In particular, he claimed that they had naked sex, but Mrs. Steele was wearing a dress in the images. It was unlikely that he dressed her after her death. There was also confusion regarding tying up his wife. Andrews stated that he used handcuffs, then plastic cables, and then started talking about ropes on her wrists and ankles, although there were no signs of tying on her legs. However, there were signs on her hands. Cable ties were found lying on the living room floor in front of the sofa, and there was a pair of handcuffs on the coffee table. Casey's blood was discovered on the dining room carpet, along with bloody marks that suggested she was likely shot in the living room. Andrews' DNA was found under Casey's fingernails, indicating they had fought. Casey had numerous bruises and abrasions, as well as gunshot wounds to her lower body. She also suffered a broken nose and a cerebral hemorrhage, pointing to a violent struggle. Police noted that Casey was found wrapped in a towel and not wearing any clothes, raising suspicions that Andrew may have attempted to assault her. However, Casey did not mention this during the call, possibly because she didn't have time to reveal the full truth. Another theory is that Andrew knew he was dying and he loved these women, which led him to decide to take them with him. It is possible that his twisted love and fear of dying alone drove him to commit this horrific act. Considering these factors, the prosecutor was convinced that the double murder was premeditated and executed according to a calculated plan. On April 23, 2015, after 2 weeks of thorough questioning and testimonies, the jury began deliberating the verdict. The families of the deceased women were profoundly disappointed when the jury concluded that Andrew lacked the mental capacity to understand his actions during the massacre. The defense successfully argued that his mental illness contributed to his deteriorating psychological state, which ultimately drove him to commit the act. As a result, he was found not guilty and was ordered to be placed in a psychiatric hospital. The victims' families felt that the verdict was unjust and did not provide them with a sense of safety. They believed that the perpetrator should be imprisoned. Casey's husband stated that the mentally ill man should be confined until his condition worsened to a point where he could no longer pose a threat. He could remain in the clinic for the rest of his life. 7 months later, Andrew's doctors reported that he was no longer a threat to society due to his rapidly deteriorating mental and physical health. By this point, Andrew was unable to care for himself or even move. It was predicted that he would soon need to be placed on a ventilator as his condition was rapidly deteriorating. On March 7, 2017, Andrew passed away due to illness. It is still unclear whether the illness could have led someone to commit murder or whether it was a clever deception by Andrew and his lawyer.